They laughed at the little mechanic, but when they went to start the Mustang, everyone fell silent. Little Michael Johnson heard the laughter echo through the shop once again on that Tuesday morning. At just 10 years old, he had offered to take a look at the engine of the blue 1967 Mustang that had been giving trouble for 3 weeks to the more experienced mechanics in the town of Greenbrook. "Get out of there, kid. This isn't child's play," shouted Stephen, the shop owner, as he wiped his hands on a greasy rag. "Go play with toy cars at home and let the men work." The laughter of the other mechanics filled the hot, stuffy air of the shop. Michael felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he didn't move away from the Mustang. There was something about that engine the adults weren't seeing. He was sure of it. "But Mr. Stephen, I know what's wrong," the boy insisted, his high-pitched voice nearly lost in the noise of tools and machines. "Just let me take a proper look." "Listen here, Squirt," said Jack, a 40-year-old mechanic who had worked at the shop for over 20 years. "I've been tinkering with engines longer than you've been alive. If I couldn't fix it, what makes you think you can?" The owner of the Mustang, a businessman named Robert Fleming, watched the scene from a distance with a displeased expression. He had brought his car to the shop after 3 other places failed to solve the problem. The engine simply wouldn't run right, constantly misfiring and losing power. "It's been 3 weeks since I brought my car here," Robert said, his voice thick with impatience. "You told me it would only take a few days." Stephen wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of grease on his sun-tanned skin. Johnson & Sons had been the family business for 2 generations, but lately things had been tough. Competition from bigger shops in the neighboring town was stealing customers, and every botched job further tarnished the shop's reputation. "Look, Mr. Robert, the problem is more complicated than we first thought," Stephen explained, avoiding the customer's direct gaze. "But I'm sure by the end of the week..." "By the end of the week?" Robert cut in, his patience clearly worn thin. "You said that last week." Michael took advantage of the adult's distraction to move even closer to the Mustang's open engine. His eyes traced every component, every wire, every connection. He had grown up in that shop, helping his father since he learned to walk. Even though he was very young, he had a natural knack for understanding how things worked. The boy noticed something that caught his attention near the distributor. There was a small crack in one of the hoses that the other mechanics had missed. It was almost unnoticeable, but he knew it could be causing all the problems the car was having. "Dad," Michael called out to Carl Johnson, a 45-year-old man working quietly on the other side of the shop. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Carl Johnson was a skilled mechanic, but had always worked in the shadow of his older brother, Stephen. When their father had passed the shop down to them, it was decided Stephen would be the main person in charge, while Carl handled the technical side. It was an arrangement that had never worked perfectly. "What is it, son?" Carl asked, walking over to the boy while drying his hands on a piece of cloth. "I think I know what's wrong with the Mustang," Michael whispered, discreetly, pointing to the engine. "There's a cracked hose near the distributor. It's small, but it might be causing a loss of pressure." Carl looked in the direction his son pointed, then back at the boy. Michael had shown many times that he had a natural talent for mechanics, but Stephen always insisted that a child's place was in school, not in the workshop. "Are you sure about what you're saying?" asked Carl, lowering his voice so Stephen wouldn't hear. "Yes, Dad, look here." Michael pointed to the exact spot where he had noticed the problem. "The crack is tiny, but it's in just the right place to cause all these issues the car is having." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Carl moved closer to the engine and carefully examined the spot his son had pointed out. After a few minutes, his eyes widened when he finally saw the small crack Michael had identified. It was so subtle it could easily be missed, but it was exactly where it could cause all the reported problems. "Good heavens," murmured Carl. "How did you even see that?" "I was looking from a different angle," Michael explained simply. "You were always looking from top to bottom, but I'm short, so I looked from bottom to top." The discovery put Carl in a tough spot. He knew his son was right, but he also knew how Stephen would react if he found out a child had solved the problem they'd been struggling with for weeks. "Listen, Michael," Carl said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'll take a closer look at this, but for now, don't tell anyone, okay?" "But Dad, why not? If I found the problem, can't I help fix it?" "It's complicated, son. Your uncle won't like the idea of a kid working on an important client's car." Michael lowered his head, frustrated. He didn't understand why. His age was always an issue when it came to something he clearly understood better than the adults. Since he was little, he'd taken toys apart to see how they worked. And as he grew older, he started doing the same with small electronics and old car parts. Meanwhile, across the workshop, Stephen was still trying to explain to Robert Fleming why the repair was taking so long. The tension in the air was thick, and Michael could see his uncle growing more and more agitated. "Mr. Fleming, I understand your impatience," Stephen said, gesturing with his grease-stained hands. "But this Mustang is an old car, and sometimes the problems are more complicated than they seem." "Complicated?" Robert rolled his eyes. "3 shops before you said the same thing. I'm starting to think no one in this town knows how to fix a car properly." The criticism hit Stephen hard. Johnson & Sons was the family's pride, and hearing they might not be competent enough to fix a car was a blow to his professional pride. "Listen here, Mr. Fleming," Stephen said, trying to keep his composure. "We do know how to fix cars. The problem is your Mustang has a very specific issue that you can't find," Robert finished. "Look, Stephen, I like you. I've always brought my cars here, but my patience is running thin. If the car isn't running perfectly by the end of the week, I'm taking it to New York City and never coming back." The threat of losing a major client and tarnishing the shop's reputation in town made Stephen's stomach churn. Robert Fleming wasn't just any customer. He owned one of the biggest transport companies in the region and had enough influence to recommend or discourage other clients. Carl discreetly approached his brother, still processing the discovery Michael had made. He knew he needed to tell Stephen about the crack in the hose, but he also knew his brother would be furious to find out it was a child who had discovered the problem. "Stephen," Carl called softly, "can I talk to you in private?" "Not now, Carl. I'm trying to sort this out with Dr. Robert. It's about the Mustang. I think I found the issue." Stephen turned to his brother with a mix of hope and suspicion in his expression. Over the past few weeks, every mechanic in the shop had found the problem at least once, only to discover their fixes didn't work. "What did you find?" Stephen asked, stepping a few paces away from Robert. Carl hesitated for a moment, torn between telling the truth about how he'd discovered the issue or simply pretending he'd found it himself. He glanced at Michael, who was watching the conversation from a distance, and made a decision. "There's a tiny crack in one of the hoses near the distributor," Carl explained. "It's almost invisible, but it's causing a pressure leak." "A crack?" Stephen narrowed his eyes. "How did you spot that? We've checked all the hoses at least." "3 times. I was looking from a different angle," Carl said, repeating his son's words. Stephen hurried over to the Mustang's engine, followed by Carl and inevitably by Robert Fleming, who was eager to see any progress on his car's repair. Jack and the other mechanics also gathered around, curious to see what Carl had found. "Where exactly?" Stephen asked, leaning over the engine. Carl pointed to the spot Michael had identified. Stephen examined it carefully, even using a flashlight for a better look. After a few minutes of detailed inspection, he finally spotted the tiny crack. "Son of a gun," Stephen muttered. "There really is a crack here. How the heck did we miss this before?" "Because it's really small," Carl explained. "And it's in a spot that's hard to see unless you look from the right angle." Robert Fleming moved closer, trying to see what the mechanics were discussing. "Did you find the problem?" "Looks like it, Dr. Robert," Stephen said, trying to hide the relief in his voice. "It's a tiny crack in one of the hoses, but it's causing a pressure leak in the system." "And can you fix it today?" Robert asked, his voice a mix of hope and skepticism. "Of course, Doctor. Just need to replace the hose. I've got a compatible part in stock," Stephen replied, already heading to the parts room. Michael watched the whole scene with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was happy the problem had finally been identified and would soon be fixed. On the other, he felt frustrated at not getting credit for his discovery. While Stephen searched for the replacement part, Carl approached his son again. "Thank you, Michael," he said quietly. "You saved the shop today." But why can't Uncle Stephen know I was the one who found it? The boy asked, his voice heavy with sadness. Because your uncle is very proud, son. He won't like hearing a kid solved something he couldn't. But that's not fair, Dad. I know it isn't, Michael. But sometimes life just isn't fair. The conversation was cut short when Stephen returned with the new hose. Within minutes, he'd replaced the faulty part and was preparing to test the engine. All set, Dr. Robert, Stephen announced, wiping his hands. Let's see if the problem's fixed. Robert stepped up to the car and turned the ignition. The Humchi. Mustang's engine roared to life with a deep, powerful sound that hadn't been heard in weeks. The businessman revved it a few times, and the engine responded perfectly with no hiccups or loss of power. Fantastic, exclaimed Robert, smiling for the first time in weeks. Finally, the engine runs like new. Stephen smiled proudly, accepting praise from Robert and the other mechanics. Carl forced a smile, but inside, he felt awful for not giving credit to his son. Michael remained silent, watching everyone celebrate a discovery that had been his. Mr. Robert, said Stephen as he lowered the Mustang's hood, I'm sorry for the delay. Sometimes the smallest problems are the hardest to find. What matters is that you fixed it, replied Robert, clearly relieved. How much do I owe you? While Stephen and Robert settled the payment details, Jack approached Carl with a curious look. How did you spot that crack, Carl? Asked the most experienced mechanic. I swear I checked that engine from every possible angle. Carl hesitated before answering. Sometimes it's just luck, Jack. Right place, right time. Luck, huh? Jack didn't seem entirely convinced. Well, the important thing is the problem's fixed. After Robert drove off in his perfectly running Mustang, the sea-ice atmosphere in the shop became much more relaxed. Stephen was visibly relieved to have kept an important client and saved the shop's reputation. Carl, Stephen called, walking over to his brother. Great job today. You really saved our skin. It was nothing, Stephen. Just doing my job. No, it wasn't just that. You found a problem the rest of us missed. You deserve the credit. Carl glanced at Michael, who was organizing tools on the other side of the shop, pretending not to listen. Guilt weighed on his chest like a stone. Actually, Stephen, there's something I need to tell you. What is it? Carl took a deep breath, ready to reveal the truth about how the problem had really been discovered. But before he could speak, he was interrupted by another customer. A woman in her 60s parked a silver Civic in front of the shop and stepped out with a worried expression. It was Betty, a long-time customer who always brought her cars to Johnson & Sons for repairs. Good afternoon, Mr. Stephen, Betty greeted, walking over slowly. My car's making a strange noise in the engine. Could you take a look? Of course, Betty, Stephen replied, immediately shifting his attention to the new customer. You're always welcome here. Betty's arrival cut short the brothers' conversation, and Carl missed his chance to tell the truth about Michael's discovery. The boy kept organizing tools, feeling invisible once again. Betty explained that the noise had started the previous morning and was gradually getting worse. Stephen asked her to start the engine, and immediately everyone could hear a metallic rattling coming from under the hood. Sounds like a belt or bearing issue, Jack remarked after listening carefully. I'll take a look, Stephen said, lifting the Civic's hood. Michael quietly moved closer, curious to see what the problem was this time. His experience with the Mustang had boosted his confidence, and he was eager to apply his knowledge again. While Stephen and Jack inspected the engine, Michael watched from a safe distance. The noise was distinct, and based on what he'd learned watching the mechanics work, he suspected the issue was with the alternator belt. Stephen, said Carl, approaching his brother, about that conversation we were having. Later. Carl, right now I need to fix Mrs. Betty's problem. Carl sighed, frustrated that he couldn't share the truth about his son. Every passing moment made it harder to admit he'd lied about who really discovered the issue with the Mustang. After a thorough inspection, Stephen concluded it was indeed a problem with the alternator belt, which was worn out and needed replacement. It was a relatively simple and quick fix. Mrs. Betty, the issue is with the alternator belt, Stephen explained. I can replace it today. It'll be ready in an hour. Wonderful, Mr. Stephen. I'll leave the car here and come back later to... Pick it up. After Mrs. Betty left, the shop returned to its usual rhythm. Stephen started working on the Civic, while Jack and the other mechanics handled the remaining cars waiting for repairs. Michael continued helping with small tasks, like organizing tools and cleaning parts, but his mind was stuck on what had happened with the Mustang. He couldn't understand why he had to hide his ability just because he was a kid. His father had promised they'd talk later, but Michael was impatient. He wanted to prove to everyone that age didn't determine skill, especially when it came to something he truly understood. Around 4 in the afternoon, when the shop was quieter, Carl finally got a moment to speak with Stephen privately. They stepped away into the small, cramped office at the back of the shop. "Stephen, I need to tell you something about the Mustang," Carl began nervously. "What is it?" Stephen asked, sitting in the creaky chair behind the paper-covered desk. "I wasn't the one who found the cracked hose." Stephen looked confused. "What do you mean? You said you found the crack. It was Michael who found it." "Michael?" Stephen repeated, disbelieving. "My 10-year-old nephew." "That's right. He called me over and showed me exactly where the problem was. I just confirmed he was right." Stephen's face cycled through several expressions in seconds: surprise, disbelief, then irritation. "Carl, are you telling me a child found a problem that I, you, Jack, and every other mechanic in this shop couldn't see?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Stephen stood abruptly, pacing the small office. "That's impossible, Carl. A child doesn't have the knowledge or experience to..." "Stephen, you saw the crack with your own eyes. The Mustang is running perfectly now. It doesn't matter who found the problem. What matters is that it was found." "It does matter," Stephen snapped. "How do I explain to customers that a 10-year-old boy is a better mechanic than professionals with decades of experience? No one needs to know." "Everyone will know, Carl. News like this spreads fast in a small town like Greenbrook. In a few days, everyone will be saying Johnson & Sons needs kids to solve problems the adults can't." Carl understood his brother's concern, but also felt he was being unfair to Michael. The boy had real talent and deserved at least some recognition. "Stephen, Michael is my son, but above all he has a natural gift for mechanics. Wouldn't it be better to nurture that talent instead of dismissing it?" "He's 10, Carl. A child's place is in school, playing with other kids, not in a shop handling dangerous tools. But he loves it, Stephen, and he's good at it. Loving it isn't enough. Mechanics is a profession for adults. It requires responsibility, experience, and knowledge that only comes with time." The argument between the brothers was growing more heated. Outside the office, Michael could hear their raised voices, though he couldn't make out exactly what they were saying. "Listen, Carl," said Stephen, trying to calm himself. "I understand you want what's best for your son, but I can't let him work on customers' cars. The responsibility falls on us, and if something goes wrong, we're the ones who'll answer for it. Nobody's asking him to work on the cars alone, Stephen, but he could help, observe, learn. No, Carl, my decision is final. Michael can keep coming here after school to keep us company, but that's it. No touching engines or giving opinions on repairs." Carl felt a mix of anger and frustration. He knew Stephen was being stubborn and stifling his son's natural talent. "You're making a mistake, Stephen." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. This is my shop and my rules." The conversation ended tensely, with Carl leaving the office visibly upset. Michael sensed something had happened, but didn't dare ask right away. For the rest of the afternoon, the atmosphere in the shop was heavy. Carl worked in silence. Stephen avoided looking at his brother, and Michael felt somehow responsible for the tension. Around 6 in the evening, as the shop was about to close, Carl finally approached his son. "Michael, we need to talk." "What happened, Dad? Did you argue because of me?" Carl sighed deeply. "Son, I told your uncle it was you who found the problem with the Mustang." "What did he say?" "He wasn't happy. In fact, he's forbidden you from working on customers' cars." Michael felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "But why, Dad?" "I just wanted to help." "I know, son. But your uncle's afraid something might go wrong and the shop could lose customers. That's not fair." "No, it's not, but sometimes we have to accept unfair decisions." Michael looked around the shop, at the tools, the cars, the engines. He loved studying and understanding. The thought of no longer being able to participate even in the smallest way in the work he considered his passion, was devastating. "So what now, Dad? What do I do?" Carl placed a hand on his son's shoulder, trying to offer comfort he didn't fully feel himself. "For now, you'll keep coming here after school, just to keep us company and maybe organize some tools. No working on engines." "But Dad, what if I see a problem you guys miss? Can't I even say anything?" The question put Carl in a tough spot. He didn't want to discourage his son, but he couldn't openly defy Stephen's authority in the shop. "Son, if you notice something, you can tell me privately, but quietly, understand?" Michael nodded, though he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. He understood his father's difficult position, but still felt he was being treated unfairly just because of his age. That night at dinner, the Johnson family was quieter than usual. Helen, Michael's mother and Carl's wife, could tell something was wrong but respected the men's space to work things out. "How was the shop today?" she asked, trying to break the silence. "It was interesting," Carl replied, avoiding details. "We fixed Dr. Roberts' Mustang." "That's good. He'd been complaining for weeks." Michael pushed his food around his plate, his appetite gone. His mind was processing the events of the day and trying to understand why talent and skill mattered less than age in his uncle's opinion. "Michael, are you okay?" asked Helen, noticing her son's behavior. "I'm fine, Mom, just a little tired." Helen looked at Carl, searching for some clue about what might be going on, but her husband avoided her gaze. After dinner, when Michael went to his room to do homework, Helen pulled Carl aside for a private conversation. "What happened at the shop today?" she asked, crossing her arms. Carl told his wife the whole story. Michael's discovery, the initial lie, the conversation with Stephen, and the ban imposed on the boy. "Carl, how could you lie about something like that?" Helen questioned, visibly upset. "I wanted to protect Michael. I knew Stephen wouldn't like hearing that a child found the problem. And you were right, but now the situation is even worse." "I know, Helen. I regret it." Helen sighed, thinking about the possible consequences for the whole family. "Carl, you two need to fix this. Michael loves that shop, and it's not fair to take away something he has a natural talent for. I know, but Stephen is stubborn. Once he makes a decision, it's hard to change his mind. Then you'll have to find a way to prove him wrong." The conversation between Carl and Helen went on longer, but they didn't reach any definite conclusion on how to resolve the situation. In the end, they decided Carl would try talking to Stephen again in a few days, once tempers had cooled. Meanwhile, in his room, Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of injustice, wasted talent, and the dream of one day proving to everyone that age didn't determine ability. He knew he couldn't just accept his uncle's ban without a fight. Somehow he'd find a way to show he deserved to be taken seriously as a mechanic, even if he was just a kid. The next day, Michael went to school as usual, but his mind was far from the lessons. During recess, he talked to his best friend, Gavin, about what had happened at the shop. "Man, that's so unfair," Gavin said, after hearing the whole story. "You found the problem the adults couldn't see, and they still won't let you help." "Exactly. My uncle thinks kids shouldn't mess with cars." "But you know what you're doing. I've seen you fix my bike plenty of times." "A bike's different from a car, Gavin. But the basics are the same, right? Gears, chains, brakes. You understand how it all works." The conversation with Gavin got Michael thinking maybe there was a way to prove his worth without directly challenging his uncle's authority. He just needed the right opportunity. That opportunity came sooner than expected. On Thursday morning before school, Michael stopped by the shop to pick up a tool he'd forgotten the day before. When he got there, he found an unusual scene. A delivery truck was parked in front of the shop, and the driver, a middle-aged man named Frank, was trying to convince Stephen to take a look at his vehicle. "Listen, Stephen, I know you mostly work on cars, but my truck's acting up and I need to deliver these parts today," Frank explained, gesturing with his hands. "Frank, I'd like to help, but trucks are trickier than cars. I don't have much experience with bigger engines," Stephen replied, clearly reluctant. "Please, Stephen, just take a quick look. Maybe it's something simple." Michael quietly moved closer, curious to understand what the problem was. Frank explained that the truck was losing power and making a strange noise, especially when going uphill. Stephen agreed to take a look, More out of courtesy than confidence in his ability to fix the problem, he lifted the hood of the truck and was faced with an engine much larger and more complex than he was used to. "Carl," Stephen called, "come take a look at this." Carl approached and was also intimidated by the size and complexity of the truck's engine. The two brothers began a basic inspection, but it was clear they were out of their comfort zone. Michael watched from a distance, analyzing the engine with his trained eyes. Even though it was bigger than car engines, the basic principles were the same, and there was something specific that caught his attention. Near the air filter, he noticed one of the connections was loose, not completely disconnected, but loose enough to cause performance issues. It was exactly the kind of problem that could lead to power loss and strange noises. The boy was torn. He had promised his father he would be discreet, but he also knew Frank needed the truck to be working for his job. After a few minutes of internal debate, he decided to act. "Dad," Michael called softly, approaching Carl. "Michael, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in school?" "It's not time yet, Dad. I think I found the problem with the truck." Carl looked around nervously. Stephen was busy examining a different part of the engine, but it was still risky. "What did you see?" Carl asked, in a very low voice. "There's a loose connection near the air filter. It's easy to see if you look from the right angle." Carl discreetly followed his son's direction and quickly located the loose connection. It really was a simple problem, one that could be fixed in minutes. "My God, Michael, how do you see these things?" "I don't know, Dad. I just look and notice when something isn't right." Carl was torn again, whether to tell Stephen the truth or pretend he had found the problem himself. But this time, seeing his son's obvious talent and thinking about the unfairness of the situation, he made a different decision. "Stephen," Carl called, loud enough for Frank to hear too. "What is it?" Michael found the problem. Stephen turned, quickly, his face irritated. "Carl, we talked about this yesterday." "I know what we talked about, but look." Carl pointed to the loose connection. "It's a loose connection in the air intake system. Easy to fix." Frank came closer to see what was being discussed. "The boy found the problem?" he asked, surprised. "He did," Carl confirmed, ignoring Stephen's furious glare. Stephen walked over to the indicated area and confirmed there really was a loose connection. In less than 2 minutes, he had tightened it properly. "There, Frank, try starting it now," Stephen said, trying to maintain his authority despite the situation. Frank started the truck and immediately noticed the difference. The engine ran smoothly, with no strange noises, and when he accelerated, it responded with full power. "Fantastic," Frank exclaimed. "It's working perfectly." "That's good," Stephen said, forcing a smile. "And the boy really was the one who found the problem?" Frank insisted, looking at Michael with admiration. Before Stephen could answer, Carl confirmed, "He was. Michael has a natural talent for these things." Frank crouched down to Michael's height. "What's your name, son?" "Michael Johnson, sir." "Michael, you just saved my day. If my truck hadn't been fixed, I would have lost important contracts." "I'm glad I could help, Mr. Frank." Frank stood up and turned to Stephen. "Mr. Stephen, this boy is a gem. You're lucky to have someone like him in the family." Stephen mumbled something unintelligible in response, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Carl, on the other hand, was visibly proud of his son. "How much do I owe for the repair?" asked Frank. It was just tightening a connection. I won't charge you anything," replied Stephen, still processing what had happened. "Are you sure?" The boy fixed in minutes what could have cost me the whole day. "I'm sure, Frank. Happy to help." After Frank left with his truck running perfectly, the shop fell into an awkward silence. Michael knew he had indirectly disobeyed his uncle's orders, but he didn't regret helping. "Stephen," Carl began, ready to defend his son. "No, Carl, I don't want to hear it," Stephen interrupted, raising his hand. "What happened here only confirms my concerns." "What concerns?" Michael solved the problem quickly, and Frank was satisfied. "And what happens when he can't fix it? What if he causes a bigger problem? What if a customer gets upset finding out a child is working on their car?" "Stephen, you're making up problems that don't exist. I'm protecting my business, Carl, and my decision stands. Michael doesn't touch cars in this shop anymore." The firmness in Stephen's voice made it clear there was no room for negotiation. Carl felt powerless, and Michael once again found himself punished for trying to help. "Now get to school, Michael," Stephen ordered, "and don't be late." Michael grabbed his backpack and headed for the door, but before leaving he turned to the two adults. "Uncle Stephen, I just want to help. I don't understand why that's bad." "It's not bad, Michael, but you're a child and children have other responsibilities. Go study and leave adult work to the adults." With a heavy heart, Michael left the shop and went to school. All day he struggled to focus in class, constantly thinking about the unfairness of the situation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the shop, the tension between the brothers lingered all day. Carl worked in silence, clearly upset with Stephen's inflexible stance. Jack and the other mechanics noticed the heavy atmosphere, but chose not to get involved. Around 3 in the afternoon, Mrs. Carmen arrived at the shop, a 58-year-old woman who owned a small candy store downtown. Her silver Chevette had been having ignition trouble for days. "Good afternoon, Mr. Stephen," greeted Mrs. Carmen, struggling out of the car. "My little car's being stubborn about starting." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Carmen. Let's take a look," replied Stephen, approaching the Chevette. Mrs. Carmen explained that sometimes the car started fine, but other times it took several tries. The problem had started sporadically, but was gradually worsening. Stephen asked her to try starting it, and sure enough, it took multiple attempts before the engine caught. The sound suggested the engine was turning over but struggling to stay running. "Seems like an ignition issue," commented Jack, who came over to help diagnose. "Could be spark plugs, the coil, or even the distributor," Stephen agreed. The two experienced mechanics began a systematic inspection of the ignition system. They checked the spark plugs, which were in good condition, tested the coil, which seemed to work fine, and examined the distributor without finding any obvious issues. So, after an hour of work, they still hadn't identified the exact cause of the problem. The car occasionally started on the first try, but most attempts still struggled. "Mrs. Carmen," said Stephen, wiping sweat from his forehead, "the issue is more complicated than we initially thought. We'll need more time to run a full diagnosis." "How long, Mr. Stephen?" "I need the car for work. I use it to deliver sweets to offices in the city." "Maybe until tomorrow afternoon," Mrs. Carmen sighed worriedly. Being without the car for 2 days would mean missing several deliveries, and as a result, losing money. It was then that Michael arrived from school. He saw the Chevette with its hood open and his uncle and Jack working on the engine, but this time he kept his distance, remembering Stephen's warning. Still, even from afar, he could observe what the adults were doing. They had checked the most obvious components of the ignition system, but Michael noticed they hadn't paid attention to the spark plug wires. From his position, he could see one of the wires was slightly loose on the plug, not completely disconnected, but with a poor connection that could cause exactly the symptoms Mrs. Carmen described. Michael was torn again. He had promised to stay out of it, but he clearly saw a problem the adults were missing. Mrs. Carmen needed the car for work, and he knew how to fix the issue in seconds. After a few minutes of internal debate, he decided to tell his father, as they had agreed. He quietly approached Carl, who was organizing tools on the other side of the shop. "Dad," Michael whispered, "I think I know what's wrong with the Chevette." Carl glanced nervously at Stephen, who was busy testing electrical components. "What did you see, Michael?" "One of the spark plug wires is loose, the third one counting from left to right." Carl discreetly followed his son's gaze and, after careful inspection, confirmed there was indeed a poorly connected wire. This put Carl in an even tougher spot. It was the third time in just a few days that Michael had spotted problems experienced mechanics couldn't see. Ignoring his son's findings was becoming harder to justify. "Dad, why don't you tell?" "Uncle Stephen, Mrs. Carmen needs her car." Carl looked at his son, then at Stephen, and finally at Mrs. Carmen, who was waiting anxiously by her car. The decision he made in that moment could change the course of many things. "Michael, I'm going to ask you something. Go ahead and tell your uncle yourself what you saw." "But Dad, he'll be mad at me." He might be, but sometimes we have to face difficult situations to do the right thing. Michael took a deep breath, gathering courage. He knew Stephen might react badly, but he also knew Mrs. Carmen needed his help. The boy slowly approached where Stephen and Jack were working. They were so focused on checking the electrical system, they didn't notice him at first. "Uncle Stephen," Michael called firmly. Stephen turned with a look of surprise and irritation. "Michael, I told you not to interfere with repairs." "I know, Uncle, but I think I saw the problem with Mrs. Carmen's car." "Michael," Stephen began warningly. "Please, Uncle, just let me say it. It's quick." Mrs. Carmen, who had been listening, stepped closer, curiously. "The boy knows what's wrong with my car." "Mrs. Carmen, it's best not to pay attention to kids' ideas," said Stephen, clearly embarrassed. "But if he can help, why not listen?" Mrs. Carmen insisted. Jack, too, was curious. "Let the boy speak, Stephen. What's the harm in listening?" Stephen felt pressured by the situation. Denying Michael the chance to speak in front of Mrs. Carmen might seem like unnecessary stubbornness. "All right," Stephen said reluctantly. "Go ahead, Michael." "The third spark plug wire is loose," Michael said, pointing to the exact spot. "It's not completely disconnected, but the connection is weak." Jack stepped closer to check and quickly confirmed Michael was right. "Wow, the kid's got a point," Jack said, impressed. "The wire really is loose." Stephen moved in to see for himself, and his expression changed when he confirmed Michael's discovery. In seconds, he properly reconnected the spark plug wire. "Mrs. Carmen, try starting it now," Stephen asked. Mrs. Carmen got in the car and turned the key. The engine started instantly, running smoothly without hesitation. "My goodness," Mrs. Carmen exclaimed, "it's working perfectly." She stepped out of the car and went straight to Michael. "Young man, thank you so much. You saved my job." "It was nothing, Mrs. Carmen. I'm happy to help." Mrs. Carmen turned to Stephen. "Mr. Stephen, this boy is a genius. How does he see things you all miss?" Stephen was visibly uncomfortable. This was the third time in just a few days that Michael had solved problems he and other experienced mechanics couldn't identify. "It was luck, Mrs. Carmen. Sometimes things just happen." "Luck? 3 times in a row?" Jack shook his head in disbelief. "Stephen, this boy has real talent." "So are you starting with this too?" "It's not nonsense, Stephen, it's a fact. Michael found issues we couldn't see. That's talent, not luck." Mrs. Carmen agreed enthusiastically. "Jack's right. This boy should be helping. You all officially." "Mrs. Carmen, with all due respect, mechanics is a job for adults," Stephen insisted. "But he clearly understands cars better than many adults," Mrs. Carmen shot back. The discussion was making Stephen increasingly uneasy. He felt his authority and decisions about running the shop were being questioned. "How much do I owe?" "For the repair, Mr. Stephen?" Mrs. Carmen asked, trying to change the subject. "I won't charge you, Mrs. Carmen. It was just reconnecting a wire." "Are you sure? The boy fixed a problem that's been giving me headaches for days." "I'm sure." After Mrs. Carmen left, the silence in the shop was deafening. Jack kept looking at Michael with admiration. Carl felt proud but worried, and Stephen was visibly upset. "Stephen," Jack said, "we need to talk about Michael." "There's nothing to talk about, Jack." "There is. The boy has obvious talent. It'd be irresponsible of us to waste it." "Jack, he's 10 years old. Me, so what? Age doesn't cancel talent. In fact, talent at his age is even more impressive." Carl joined the conversation, feeling he finally had support to stand up for his son. "Stephen, Jack's right. Michael's proven 3 times he has a natural knack for diagnostics. We can't just ignore that." "Yes, I can, and I will ignore it," Stephen snapped. "This is my shop, and I decide who works here and who doesn't." "No one's saying he should work officially," Carl said, "but he could help out sometimes. Under supervision." "No." The firmness in Stephen's voice made it clear he wasn't willing to negotiate. Jack shook his head, disappointed, and Carl felt frustrated by his brother's stubbornness. Michael, who had listened to the whole conversation, walked up to Stephen. "Uncle, can I ask you something?" "What is it, Michael?" "Why don't you like it when I help?" The direct and innocent question caught Stephen off guard. He looked at the boy, seeing genuine confusion and sadness in his eyes. "It's not that I don't like you, Michael. It's just what?" Stephen hesitated. searching for words to explain his position without hurting the boy. It's just that you're too young to take on adult responsibilities. But I don't want to take on adult responsibilities. I just want to help when I can. Michael, mechanics is a dangerous profession. There are sharp tools, hot oil, electricity, if something happens to you. But I'm here every day, Uncle. I already know all the dangers. Knowing and avoiding are two different things. The conversation was dragging on longer than Stephen would have liked. He felt the more he spoke, the weaker his position became. Michael, my decision is final. You can keep coming here, but only to observe and organize tools. No diagnosing or repairs. Even when I know what's wrong. Even then. Michael lowered his head, finally understanding there was nothing he could say to change his uncle's mind. The unfairness of the situation weighed on his small chest like a stone. All right, Uncle Stephen. I'll respect your decision. The maturity in Michael's response surprised all the adults present. They expected maybe a tantrum or argument, but the boy simply accepted the decision with dignity. Carl walked over to his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. Michael, you were very mature just now. Thank you, Dad. Don't be sad. Things might change in the future. I know, Dad, but for now, I'll focus on school and just help by organizing tools. Michael's resignation made Jack feel even worse about the situation. He'd worked with many apprentices over the years, but had never seen natural talent like the boy showed. Stephen, Jack said quietly, you're making a mistake. Jack, that's enough. My decision is final. Fine. But when this boy grows up and becomes a brilliant mechanic somewhere else, you'll regret not nurturing his talent early. Stephen didn't respond, but Jack's words echoed in his mind. A small part of him knew he might be unfair, but his pride and concerns about responsibility and the shop's reputation were stronger. The rest of the afternoon passed in relative silence. Michael organized tools and cleaned some parts, keeping busy but avoiding anything that could be seen as messing with cars. Around 6 in the evening, as the shop was about to close, one last customer arrived. It was Dr. Paul Mitchell, a retired 70-year-old doctor who owned a light blue 1978 Beetle that was his pride and joy. Good evening, everyone, Dr. Paul greeted, stepping carefully out of his Beetle. My old boy has a little problem. Good. Evening, Dr. Paul, Stephen replied. What's the issue? It's making a strange noise when I brake, started yesterday and is getting worse. Dr. Paul was a special customer for the shop. Besides being a respected member of the community, he always treated everyone kindly and paid promptly for services. Stephen immediately began inspecting the Beetle's brake system. Jack joined the inspection, and Carl watched from a distance. Michael also approached but kept a respectful distance. Looks like it might be the brake pads, Jack commented after an initial visual inspection. Or maybe the rotors, Stephen added. The two mechanics asked Dr. Paul to move the car a few feet and brake gently so they could listen to the noise. The sound was clearly audible, a metallic scraping indicating brake system issues. Michael listened carefully to the noise and immediately recognized what it was. It wasn't the pads or the rotors, it was the dust shield behind the rotor that was bent and scraping against it. It was a simple problem to fix, but it was making an alarming noise. The boy was torn once again. He knew exactly what the problem was and how to fix it, but he had promised not to interfere with repairs. However, Dr. Paul was someone he deeply respected, and he hated seeing him worried. After a few minutes of watching Stephen and Jack unnecessarily inspecting pads and rotors, Michael made a decision. He discreetly approached his father. Dad, Michael whispered, it's the dust shield. It's bent and scraping against the rotor. Carl looked at his son with exasperation. Michael, we talked about this. I know, Dad, but it's Dr. Paul. He's always been kind to me. Carl glanced at Dr. Paul, who was watching the mechanics work with a worried expression. The retired doctor relied on his Beetle to get around town, and brake issues were a safety concern. Are you sure about this? Carl asked. Positive, Dad. It's easy to see if you look behind the wheel. Carl was torn between loyalty to his brother and doing the right thing for Dr. Paul. After a few seconds of hesitation, he made his choice. "Dr. Paul," Carl called. "Yes?" "My son thinks he knows what the problem is. Would you mind if he took a look?" Dr. Paul looked surprised at Michael. "Your son, but he's just a boy." "He is, but he's got a natural knack for mechanics." Stephen immediately stepped into the conversation, visibly annoyed. "Carl, we've already talked about this," Stephen said in a low but firm voice. "Stephen, just let the boy show Dr. Paul what he thinks the problem is." Dr. Paul was intrigued by the situation. As a doctor, he had often seen how natural talent could emerge at unexpected ages. "Stephen, I don't mind the boy taking a look. In fact, I'm curious to hear what he has to say." "Dr. Paul, with all due respect, I don't want to expose you to—" "Stephen," Dr. Paul gently interrupted. "I'm a 70-year-old man. I've seen plenty in my life. If this boy has an idea about my car, I'd like to hear it." Dr. Paul's stance put Stephen in an impossible position. He couldn't refuse a respected customer's request without seeming stubborn and unreasonable. "Fine," Stephen said reluctantly, "but make it quick." Michael approached the Beetle and crouched to inspect the right front wheel, where the noise seemed loudest. Within seconds, he located the issue. "Dr. Paul," Michael said, still crouched, "the dust shield behind the rotor is bent. It's scraping against the rotor when you brake." "Dust shield?" Dr. Paul asked, bending down to see what Michael was pointing at. "It's a thin plate behind the brake rotor that keeps dirt out. Sometimes it bends and starts scraping." Jack stepped over and crouched to check Michael's claim. After a few seconds, he saw exactly what the boy had described. "Wow, Michael's right," Jack said, impressed once again. "The shield really is bent and scraping." Dr. Paul looked at Michael in amazement. "How did you spot that so quickly?" "I heard the noise and knew what kind of problem it was, Doctor. Then I just looked to confirm." Stephen came over to check for himself and confirmed that once again Michael had correctly diagnosed the issue. "Is it easy to fix?" Dr. Paul asked. "Super easy," Jack replied. "Just bend the shield back into place. 2 minutes tops." In no time, Jack had adjusted the dust shield into the right position. Dr. Paul tested the brakes and the noise had completely disappeared. "Perfect!" exclaimed Dr. Paul. "Michael, thank you so much. You have a truly impressive talent." "Thank you, Dr. Paul. I'm happy to help." Dr. Paul turned to Stephen. "Stephen, you have a gem here. This boy understands cars better than many trained mechanics I've met." "Dr. Paul, he's still too young to—" "Stephen," Dr. Paul gently interrupted. "May I give my opinion as a doctor?" "Of course, Doctor." "Natural talent is a rare gift. When you find someone with such a gift, especially so young, the most important thing is to nurture and develop that talent, not suppress it." "But Doctor, he's just a child." "And I was just a child when I first showed interest in medicine. My parents encouraged me, and it shaped my entire professional life." Dr. Paul's words carried special weight. As a respected doctor and a wise elder, his opinion held influence in the community. "Dr. Paul, I understand your point, but I have responsibilities. Stephen, may I make a suggestion?" "Of course." "How about letting Michael only help with diagnostics? He can identify problems, but leave the actual repairs to the adults. That way you maintain control over safety while still making use of his talent." Dr. Paul's suggestion was sensible, offering a middle ground that could address Stephen's concerns while allowing Michael to use his natural ability. "That's a good idea," Carl agreed immediately. "I think so too," added Jack. Stephen found himself pressured by the unanimous opinion of the other adults present. Dr. Paul's suggestion was reasonable and came from someone whose opinion he deeply respected. "Let me think about it," Stephen finally said. "Don't take too long to decide, Stephen," advised Dr. Paul. "Talents like this need to be cultivated while they're young." Dr. Paul paid for the service, though Stephen tried not to charge him, and left with his Beetle running perfectly. Before leaving, he bent down to speak to Michael. "Michael, keep studying and learning. You have a bright future ahead." "Thank you, Dr. Paul. You can always count on me if you need help with your car." Dr. Paul smiled and waved before getting into his Beetle and driving off. After Dr. Paul left, the shop fell silent once again. It was the fourth time in just a few days that Michael had correctly diagnosed problems that experienced mechanics couldn't immediately identify. "Stephen," said Jack, "how many more times does this need to happen before you recognize that this boy has real talent?" Jack: "No, Stephen, let me speak. I've been working in mechanics for over 20 years. I've seen many apprentices, many new mechanics, many veterans, and I've never seen anyone with the natural diagnostic ability Michael has." Carl joined the conversation. "Stephen, Dr. Paul gave a sensible suggestion. Letting Michael only help with diagnostics solves all your safety and responsibility concerns. And imagine how it could help our business," added Jack. "A prodigy who can diagnose problems quickly. Customers would be impressed." "Jack, I don't want to turn my nephew into a circus act. I'm not talking about making him an attraction. I'm talking about using a natural talent responsibly." Michael listened to the conversation silently, hopeful, but trying not to show too much enthusiasm to avoid influencing his uncle's decision. "Uncle Stephen," Michael finally said, "can I speak?" "Go ahead, Michael. I promise that if you let me help only with diagnostics, I'll always wait for your permission before saying anything, and I'll never touch anything without adult supervision." The maturity in Michael's proposal impressed Stephen. The boy was showing he understood adults' concerns and was willing to work within clear boundaries. "But what if you're wrong about a diagnosis?" Stephen asked. "Then you double-check and make the right call. It won't change anything from what you already do. And if a customer doesn't like the idea of a kid messing with their car, then you explain, 'I'm just giving an opinion, but the adults will do all the work.'" Stephen fell silent for a few minutes, weighing the pros and cons. Jack and Carl waited anxiously for his decision, while Michael tried to stay calm despite his nerves. "All right," Stephen finally said. "We'll give it a try." Michael's eyes lit up. "Really, Uncle? 1 week. You can give opinions on diagnoses, but only when I ask. And you never touch anything without my explicit permission." "I promise, Uncle Stephen. If any customer complains, or if there's any trouble, everything goes back to how it was." "Understood." Carl smiled in relief, and Jack gave Michael a pat on the back. "Congrats, kid. But remember, with talent comes responsibility. I know, Mr. Jack, I won't let you down." Stephen's decision marked a new chapter in Michael's life. For the first time, he'd have an official chance to use his natural talent for mechanics in a constructive way. That evening at dinner, Michael told his mother about the day's events and Stephen's decision to let him help with diagnostics. "Michael, what wonderful news!" Helen exclaimed. "But remember what we talked about responsibility." "I remember, Mom. I'll do everything right." "Carl," Helen said, turning to her husband, "do you think Stephen really changed his mind? I think he realized he couldn't ignore Michael's talent anymore. Too many coincidences in a row." "They weren't coincidences, Dad," Michael corrected. "Just observation and logic." Helen smiled. "Son, you're 10 years old and already sound like an engineer." "An engineer?" Michael looked thoughtful. "Maybe I should study engineering when I grow up." "You can study whatever you want, dear. But for now, focus on school and make the most of this opportunity at the shop." The Johnson family finished dinner in celebration. For the first time in weeks, everyone felt optimistic about the future and how Michael's talent would grow. The next day, Michael went to school with extra energy. During recess, he told Gavin about his uncle's decision. "Dude, that's awesome," Gavin exclaimed. "Now you can show everyone what a great mechanic you are." "Yeah, but I have to be careful. Not to let anyone down. You won't, you're the best." His best friend's confidence gave Michael even more motivation. He was determined to prove Stephen's decision right. After school, Michael headed to the shop, his anxiety mixed with excitement. It was his first day officially using his talent to help customers. When he arrived, he found Stephen working alone on a black Golf. Jack had gone to pick up parts and Carl was busy with another car. "Good afternoon, Uncle Stephen," Michael greeted. "Afternoon, Michael. How was school?" "Good. Can I ask what's wrong with this Golf?" "Owner says it's losing power when accelerating and sometimes makes a strange noise in the engine." Michael stepped closer, watching Stephen work. His uncle was checking the ignition system, following standard protocol for performance issues. "Uncle, can I listen to the engine running?" "Go ahead." Stephen started the engine and revved it a few times. Michael listened carefully, focusing on the different sounds the engine was making. After a few minutes of attentive listening, he identified a specific pattern in the noises that indicated a problem with the air intake system. "Uncle Stephen," Michael said respectfully, "can I give my opinion?" "Go ahead." "I think the issue might be with the air filter or one of the hoses in the intake system. The sound it's making is typical of an airflow problem." Stephen stopped what he was doing and looked at Michael. "Why do you say that?" "Because of the type of noise and how the engine loses power. When there's not enough air, the engine gets choked up and makes that kind of sound." Stephen considered Michael's explanation and decided to check the air filter. When he removed it, he found it was completely clogged with dirt and debris. "Wow, Michael, you hit the nail on the head. The filter is completely dirty." "So that was it, Uncle? That was it? With the filter in this state, the engine can't breathe properly." Stephen replaced the dirty filter with a new one and started the engine again. The difference was immediate. The engine ran smoothly without strange noises and responded properly when accelerated. "Perfect," Stephen said, clearly impressed. "Spot-on diagnosis and a quick fix." Michael smiled proudly. "Thank you." "Uncle, I'm glad I could help." "Michael, how do you identify these problems so quickly?" "I don't know how to explain it, Uncle. I listen to the sounds and just kind of know what each one means. It's like the engine is talking to me." Michael's explanation was both simple and profound. Stephen was beginning to understand that his nephew's talent went beyond technical knowledge. It was a natural intuition for mechanics. When Jack returned with the parts, he found Stephen and Michael chatting animatedly about different types of engine problems and their characteristic symptoms. "How's our official consultant's first day going?" Jack asked with a smile. "Very well," Stephen replied. "He just correctly diagnosed a clogged air filter." "Doesn't surprise me one bit," Jack said. "That boy has a gift." The rest of the afternoon passed quickly, with Michael observing and learning while Stephen and Jack worked on different cars. Around 5 in the evening, another customer arrived who would test Michael's skills again. It was Mrs. Mary, a retired 65-year-old teacher who owned a white Focus. She explained that the car had started pulling to one side when she braked, and she was worried about safety. "Mrs. Mary, I'll take a look at the brake system," Stephen said. "This kind of problem is usually related to the pads or the cylinders." Stephen began a systematic inspection of the brake system, checking the pads, discs, and brake fluid. Jack joined the inspection, and Michael watched respectfully from a distance. After an initial visual inspection, Stephen asked Mrs. Mary to move the car slowly and brake gently so he could feel how the car behaved. Sure enough, the Focus pulled slightly to the right when braked. It was a subtle issue, but definitely dangerous if left unfixed. "Stephen," Jack said, "the brake pads are in good shape and the brake fluid is normal too." "Yeah, I don't see any obvious problem either. Could be something with the cylinders or the hoses." Michael listened to the conversation and observed the described symptoms. Based on his earlier experience and the patterns he'd learned to recognize, he had a suspicion about what the issue might be. "Uncle Stephen," Michael said respectfully, "can I give an opinion?" "Of course, Michael. What do you think?" "Couldn't it be a wheel alignment issue?" "If a wheel is misaligned, it can cause this kind of behavior during braking." Stephen and Jack exchanged glances. Alignment issues could indeed cause irregular braking behavior, but it was something they hadn't initially considered. "That's a possibility," Jack agreed. "But to be sure, we'd have to take the car in for an alignment." "Mrs. Mary," Stephen said, "when was the last time you had your car aligned?" "Alignment?" Mrs. Mary looked thoughtful. "I don't think I ever have. I've had this car for 3 years, and no one's ever mentioned alignment to me." "Oh, Mrs. Mary," Stephen said, "alignment is important for safety and tire longevity. We recommend doing it at least once a year." "And do you do alignments here?" "No, Mrs. Mary. For that, you'd need to take it to a specialized shop. But I can recommend a trustworthy place." Stephen suggested a reliable alignment shop in town, and Mrs. Mary agreed to take the car there the next day. Before leaving, she turned to Michael. "Young man, was it you who suggested the problem?" Might be alignment. Yes, Mrs. Mary. Very clever. You're going to be an excellent mechanic when you grow up. Thank you, Mrs. Mary. After Mrs. Mary left, Jack turned to Michael. Michael, how did you think of alignment? It's the kind of problem many mechanics don't consider right away. I thought about it this way. If the brakes are working fine on both sides but the car pulls to one side, it must be because one wheel is positioned differently from the other. Perfect logic, Stephen remarked, once again impressed by his nephew's reasoning. Michael's first official day as a diagnostic consultant had been a success. He'd helped with 2 different problems, showing both technical knowledge and logical thinking. At the end of the afternoon, Stephen called Michael for a private talk. Michael, how did you feel today? I felt really good, Uncle. I liked being able to help officially. And do you understand this is a big responsibility? I do. If I give the wrong diagnosis, I could cause problems for the customers and the shop. Exactly. But so far you've shown great judgment and responsibility. Thank you, Uncle Stephen. I'll keep working hard not to disappoint. I'm sure you will. And Michael? Yes? I'm sorry for doubting you earlier. You really do have a special talent. Stephen's apology meant a lot to Michael. It was official recognition that his talent was real and valuable. No need to apologize, Uncle. I understand you wanted to protect me. The conversation between uncle and nephew marked a fundamental shift in their relationship and the shop's dynamics. Michael had finally found his place, and Stephen had learned to value talent regardless of age. In the following days, word about the prodigy boy at Johnson & Sons began spreading through town. Mrs. Mary returned to confirm it really had been an alignment issue, and she was so impressed she told several friends about Michael's skill. Dr. Paul also spread the news in his social circles, talking about how a 10-year-old boy had quickly diagnosed a problem that had been troubling him for days. Within a week, the shop started getting new customers who came specifically to see the boy who understands cars. Stephen was initially worried it might turn into a circus, but he soon realized customers took Michael seriously and respected his ability. One of these new customers was Professor Anthony, a 55-year-old man who taught physics at the local high school. He arrived at the shop with a white Taurus that had intermittent electrical issues. "Good afternoon," greeted Professor. "Anthony, I heard you have a young specialist in diagnostics." "Good afternoon, Professor," replied Stephen. "That's my nephew Michael, but he's just an assistant. We do all the real work here." Of course. But I was told he has a special knack for identifying problems." Stephen called for Michael, who was organizing tools on the other side of the shop. "Michael, come here. Professor Anthony would like your opinion on an electrical issue." Michael approached respectfully. "Good afternoon, Professor. What's the problem with your car?" "Hello, Michael. My car sometimes just stops working, not always, but now and then all the electrical systems cut out suddenly and then come back on their own." "Interesting," said Michael, making a thoughtful expression. "When does this happen? While driving, when parked, or in specific situations?" Professor Anthony was impressed by the quality of the question. "Usually when I go over bumps or when the car shakes more than usual." Michael considered the information. "Sounds like a loose connection. When the car shakes, a wire or connection might be losing contact momentarily." "That makes sense," agreed Professor Anthony. "How can we check that?" Stephen joined the conversation. "We'll have to inspect all the main connections, battery, alternator, fuses, and ignition wires." The inspection revealed that one of the battery cables was slightly loose, not enough to cause constant issues, but enough to lose contact when the car jolted over bumps. "Incredible," said Professor Anthony after Stephen tightened the connection properly. "How did you figure that out so quickly, Michael?" "It was because of what you said about it happening when the car shakes. That made me think of a mechanical connection issue." "Impressive. You use deductive logic just like we do in science." The comparison to the scientific method filled Michael with pride. Professor Anthony paid for the service and, before leaving, handed over a business card. "Michael, if you ever want to talk about physics or science in general, come see me at the school. I think you have a very analytical mind." "Thank you, Professor. Maybe I will." The interaction with Professor Anthony opened a new perspective for Michael. He began to realize that his talent for automotive diagnostics was part of a broader ability for logical analysis and problem-solving. In the following weeks, Michael continued to impress customers and mechanics with his diagnostic skills. He helped identify all kinds of issues, from oil leaks to suspension problems, always using careful observation and logical reasoning. Johnson & Sons began building a reputation not just for quality repairs, but also for the speed and accuracy of their diagnostics. Customers who once waited days for problems to be identified now got answers in minutes. However, not everything was perfect. Some mechanics from other shops in town started getting annoyed by the attention Michael was receiving. They found it humiliating that a kid was doing better work than experienced professionals. The tension reached a breaking point one Thursday afternoon when Roger Sanders, the owner of a competing shop, showed up at Johnson & Sons for a courtesy visit. Roger was a 42-year-old man, known in town for his arrogance and dirty tactics against competitors. His shop was bigger than the Johnsons', but it had a questionable reputation for service quality. "Good afternoon, Stephen," Roger greeted, with a fake smile. "How's business?" "Good afternoon, Roger. Things are fine here, and you?" "Oh, I can't complain. Always busy, you know how it is." Michael was working quietly on the other side of the shop, but he could tell there was something odd about Roger's visit. The man was looking around as if searching for something specific. "Stephen, I've heard some interesting stories about you all," Roger said, feigning disinterest. "What kind of stories?" "About a boy who does diagnostics here at the shop. Can't be true, right?" Stephen immediately got defensive. "Why couldn't it be true?" "Come on, Stephen. A kid doing mechanic work? That's not serious. Customers could sue you if something goes wrong." Michael just gives his opinion on diagnostics. All the actual work is done by adult professionals. Even so, Stephen, imagine if child protection agencies find out you're making a kid work. The veiled threat made Stephen tense. Roger was clearly trying to stir up trouble using intimidation tactics. "Roger, my nephew doesn't work here. He just observes and sometimes gives suggestions." "Oh, I see. So he doesn't get paid for these suggestions?" "Of course. Not, he's underage." "Well, because if he were getting paid, that'd be child labor. And that's a crime, Stephen." Michael listened to the conversation from afar and realized Roger was trying to cause problems for his family. He felt a mix of anger and fear, but stayed quiet as he'd promised. "Roger," Stephen said firmly, "if you have any formal accusations to make, I suggest you take them to the proper authorities. Otherwise, please let me work in peace." "Easy, Stephen. I'm not making any accusations, just giving some friendly advice. Colleague to colleague." "Advice noted. Anything else?" No, just wanted to say hello." Roger left the shop, but it was clear his visit had been a message. He was bothered by the success Johnson & Sons was having and wanted to plant seeds of doubt and worry. After Roger left, Stephen was visibly upset. Carl, who had witnessed the whole conversation, approached his brother. "Stephen, don't pay that guy any mind. He's just jealous of our success." "Carl, but what if he's right about the legal issues? What if someone files a complaint?" "A complaint about what?" "Michael doesn't work here. He just gives opinions." "But people might not see it that way." Roger's visit had planted exactly the doubt he wanted. Stephen started questioning whether letting Michael help with diagnostics was really a good idea. Michael walked up to the two men with a worried expression. "Dad, Uncle Stephen, I heard the conversation. Do you think I'm causing trouble for the shop?" "Of course not, son," Carl answered right away. "You're just helping out." "Michael," Stephen said hesitantly, "maybe it's best if we're more cautious for a while." "What does that mean, Uncle?" "It means maybe you should stop giving opinions on diagnostics until we sort this out." Stephen's suggestion hit Michael like a bucket of cold water. After weeks of successfully helping and earning customers' trust, he was being pushed aside again because of a jealous competitor's threats. "But Uncle, I didn't do anything wrong." "I know you didn't, Michael, but I have to think about the shop's and the family's safety." Carl was visibly upset with his brother's decision. "Stephen, you're letting Roger intimidate you." "It's not intimidation, Carl. It's caution. It's cowardice, Stephen, and you know it. The argument between the brothers was heating up, and Michael felt responsible for the family tension. "Dad, Uncle Stephen, I don't want you fighting because of me," Michael said, tears in his eyes. "If it's better for me to stop helping, I'll stop." Michael Johnson's emotional maturity made the two adults feel ashamed. Here was a 10-year-old boy acting with more dignity than them. "Michael," said Stephen, kneeling to be at the boy's eye level, "it's not your fault. The problem is envious people who don't like seeing our success. Then why do I have to stop helping?" Because I need to protect you and the shop." "But if I'm not doing anything wrong, why do I need protection?" Michael's simple yet profound question exposed the flaw in Stephen's reasoning. He was giving in to empty threats instead of standing up for what was right. Jack, who had overheard part of the conversation, approached the group. "Stephen, can I give my opinion?" "Go ahead, Jack." "If you stop letting Michael help because of Roger's threats, you're sending the message that he was right, and he wasn't." "Jack, but what if he actually causes legal trouble for us?" "What trouble?" "Michael isn't an employee, doesn't get paid, and doesn't handle dangerous equipment. He just gives opinions. What law does that break?" "None," Stephen admitted reluctantly. "Then why are you afraid?" Jack's question forced Stephen to confront his own insecurities. He realized he was reacting out of fear, not rationality. "Do you all think I should ignore Roger's threats?" "I think you should do what's right regardless of the threats," Carl replied. "And what's right is letting Michael keep using his talent to help people," Jack added. "But what if it causes problems?" "Then we'll deal with them when they come," Carl said. "But we won't live in fear of problems that might never exist." Michael listened quietly, hopeful but trying not to show too much expectation. He understood his uncle was in a tough spot and didn't want to pressure him further. "Uncle Stephen," Michael finally said, "if you decide it's best for me to stop, I'll understand. But I want you to know I love helping here and never meant to cause trouble." The sincerity in Michael's voice deeply moved Stephen. He looked at his nephew and saw not just a talented child, but a principled and mature person who deserved support, not abandonment. "Michael," Stephen said, taking a deep breath, "you won't stop helping." "Really, Uncle? Really? If Roger or anyone else wants to cause trouble, we'll face it together. But I won't let intimidation ruin something good." Michael smiled in relief and hugged his uncle. Carl and Jack also smiled, pleased with Stephen's decision. "Thank you, Uncle Stephen. I promise I'll never let you down." "I know you won't, Michael. And if anyone questions your right to be here, they'll have to deal with me first." The crisis caused by Roger's visit ended up strengthening the Johnson family's resolve to support Michael. They realized giving in to threats would be unfair, not just to the boy, but to all the customers who benefited from his skills. In the following days, life at the shop returned to normal. Michael kept helping with diagnostics, always under supervision and within set limits. Customers remained impressed by his ability, and the shop's reputation continued to grow. A week after Roger's visit, something unexpected happened. Professor Anthony returned to the shop, but this time it wasn't about car trouble. "Good afternoon, everyone," Professor Anthony greeted. "I came to speak with Michael, if possible." "Of course, Professor," Stephen replied. "Michael, Professor, Anthony wants to talk to you." Michael approached curiously. "Good afternoon, Professor. How can I help?" "Michael, I told some colleagues at school about you, and they were all very impressed by your analytical skills." "Thank you, Professor. Actually, I came with an invitation. I'd like you to visit my physics class to talk about how you apply logic and observation to solve problems." "Me? Speak to a class of students?" "Exactly. I think it would be very educational for my students to see how scientific principles apply in practice." Stephen joined the conversation. "Professor, Michael is still too young for this kind of presentation. Stephen, with all due respect, age is just a number. Michael demonstrates an understanding of principles that many adults haven't mastered." "But he might get nervous speaking to teenagers." "Let Michael decide," suggested Professor Anthony. "Michael, would you like to visit my class?" Michael was torn between excitement and nervousness. Speaking to a class of older students would be a completely new challenge. Professor, can I ask what exactly I'd have to talk about? You could explain how you identify car problems, what kind of observations you make, how you connect symptoms to causes. It's basically the practical application of the scientific method. Scientific method? Yes. Observation, forming hypotheses, testing theories, drawing conclusions. That's exactly what you do when diagnosing problems. Professor Anthony's explanation made Michael realize his skill with mechanics was part of something bigger. He wasn't just tinkering with cars, he was applying scientific principles intuitively. I accept the invitation, Professor, but can I bring my dad along? Of course. In fact, it would be great if he could explain what it's like working with someone so young, yet so talented. Carl smiled proudly. It would be an honor to accompany my son. The talk was scheduled for the following Friday. Michael was nervous but excited about the prospect of sharing his knowledge with older students. Over the rest of the week, he carefully prepared what he would say, with help from Carl and even Stephen, who had grown proud of the invitation. On Friday, Michael and Carl headed to the high school. It was the first time Michael had entered a classroom as a speaker, not a student. Professor Anthony's class consisted of 20 students between 15 and 17 years old. When Michael walked in, some chuckled quietly, amused by the idea of a kid giving them a talk. "Everyone," said Professor Anthony, "I'd like to introduce Michael Johnson, a young expert in automotive diagnostics, and his father, Carl." "Professor," said a student named Anna, "isn't he too young to be an expert in anything?" "Anna, that's exactly the lesson I want to teach today. Knowledge and skill don't necessarily depend on age." Professor Anthony asked Michael to explain how he identified car problems. The boy was nervous at first, but soon grew comfortable talking about something he loved. "When a car comes into the shop with a problem, I first listen to the owner explain what's happening," Michael began. "Then I observe the car running and listen to all the sounds it makes." "And how do you know what each sound means?" asked a student named Peter. "It's like learning a language. At first you don't understand anything, but after listening a lot, you start recognizing patterns." The comparison to learning a language impressed the students. They began to see that Michael wasn't just a kid playing with cars, he was someone who had developed a real skill. "Michael," said Professor Anthony, "can you give an example of how you use observation to form hypotheses?" "Sure. Last week, a car came in making noise when braking. I noticed the noise only happened when the driver pressed the brake, and it was a metal-on-metal scraping sound." "And what was your hypothesis?" asked Anna. "My first guess was an issue with the brake pads, but when we checked, the pads were fine. Then I formed a second hypothesis, a problem with the dust shield behind the disc." "And how did you test that hypothesis?" asked Peter. "We looked behind the disc and saw the shield was indeed bent and scraping. When we fixed it, the noise stopped." "That's perfect scientific method," explained Professor Anthony. "Observation, hypothesis, test, conclusion." The students were impressed by the practical application of concepts they'd only studied theoretically. Carl watched proudly as his son explained complex ideas simply and clearly. "Michael," said a student named Brittany, "how did you learn all this? Did you take a course?" No course. I learned by watching the mechanics at my dad's and uncle's shop, asking questions and trying to understand how everything works." "So you're self-taught?" asked Professor Anthony. "What does self-taught mean?" "It means you learned on your own without a formal teacher." "Oh, then I guess so. But I had help from my dad and uncle." The talk went on for nearly an hour, with the students asking increasingly interested and respectful questions. Michael answered everything naturally, showing not just technical knowledge but emotional maturity too. "Everyone," said Professor Anthony at the end. "What's the lesson you learned today?" "That age doesn't determine ability," answered Anna. "That careful observation is more important than memorized knowledge," added Peter. "That natural talent can be more valuable than formal education," said Brittany. Professor B. Anthony smiled, satisfied. "Excellent. And Michael, how did you feel speaking to us?" "It was really cool. I liked explaining what I do and why I love it so much. You have a talent for teaching too. You explained everything very clearly. After the talk, several students approached Michael with more questions and even asked for autographs. He'd become a bit of a local celebrity. On the way home, Carl talked to his son about the experience. "How did you feel, Michael?" "I felt really good, Dad. It was cool to show that kids can understand complicated things too." "Are you proud of yourself?" "I am, but I'm also grateful for your support." "You deserve all the support, son. You have a special gift and you're using it to help people." The school talk marked a new milestone in Michael's journey. He'd proven he could not just diagnose problems, but also communicate knowledge effectively. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. In the days that followed, news of Michael's talk spread even further through town. Parents of students who'd attended began seeking out Johnson & Sons, curious to meet the boy prodigy who'd impressed their children. One such parent was Dr. Lewis Fletcher, a 62-year-old retired mechanical engineer who'd worked in the automotive industry for over 30 years. He arrived at the shop on Monday morning with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Good morning," greeted Dr. Lewis. "I'm Anna's father who attended Michael's talk at school." "Good morning, Doctor," replied Stephen. "How can I help you?" "Truthfully, I came more out of curiosity than need. My daughter came home raving about a 10-year-old boy who understood cars better than many professionals." "Michael really does have a special talent," confirmed Stephen. "Well, as an engineer, I have to admit I was skeptical, but I brought my car for a test." "Doctor." Louis explained that his silver Camry was showing a very subtle problem, a slight vibration in the steering wheel only at specific speeds, between 60 and 70 kilometers per hour. "It's a very subtle issue," admitted Dr. Lewis. "It could be several things: wheel balancing, alignment, suspension, or even problems with the transmission system." Stephen called Michael, who was helping Carl with another car. "Michael, Doctor. Lewis would like your opinion on a vibration issue." Michael approached respectfully. "Good morning, Doctor. May I ask a few questions about the problem?" "Of course, go ahead. Does the vibration happen the whole time when you're at that speed, or only when you accelerate or decelerate?" Dr. Lewis was impressed by the quality of the question. "Mostly when I maintain a constant speed. When I accelerate or slow down, it lessens." "And do you feel the vibration only in the steering wheel, or also in the car's body?" "Mainly in the steering wheel, but a little in the seat too." "When was the last time you had the wheels balanced?" "About 6 months ago." Michael considered the information carefully. A vibration at specific speeds, mostly felt in the steering wheel, which lessened during acceleration or deceleration, suggested a particular issue. "Doctor, may I give my opinion? That's why I'm here. I think it might be a balancing issue, but not all 4 wheels. Probably just one wheel is unbalanced, and it's one of the front ones." "Why do you think that?" "Because the vibration is mostly in the steering wheel, not the whole car. And it happens at a specific speed, which is typical of an imbalance." Dr. Louis nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting logic. How can we check?" "We can go to a balancing shop and ask them to check just the front wheels first," suggested Stephen. "Or," added Michael, "we can swap the front wheels with the rear ones and see if the vibration changes or disappears." Michael's suggestion impressed Dr. Lewis even more. "Excellent idea. It's a simple test that can confirm or rule out the theory." Stephen and Jack quickly swapped the front and rear wheels. Dr. Lewis tested the car, and the vibration had completely disappeared. "Incredible," said Dr. Lewis, clearly impressed. "That was exactly it. One of the front wheels was unbalanced." "Now you just need to get that wheel balanced," Michael explained. Dr. Lewis turned directly to Michael. "Young man, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Doctor." "Have you ever thought about studying engineering when you grow up?" "Sometimes, Doctor, but I like the practical side more than the theoretical." "Well, engineering has a lot of practical aspects too, and you show analytical thinking that many engineers take years to develop." "You really think so?" "I'm certain. In fact, I'd like to make you an offer." Dr. Lewis turned to Stephen and Carl. "Would you mind if I spoke with Michael about engineering concepts from time to time, just informally, to stimulate his intellect?" "It would be an honor," Carl replied. "She immediately." "Dr. Lewis," said Stephen, "are you sure? Michael is still very young." Stephen, talent like this should be nurtured as early as possible. The sooner he starts understanding engineering principles, the better prepared he'll be for the future. Dr. Lewis's offer opened a new dimension in Michael's development. For the first time, he would have access to formal theoretical knowledge to complement his natural practical skills. "Michael," said Dr. Lewis, "if you'd like, you can visit me on weekends. I have many engineering books and can teach you basic concepts." "I'd really like that, Doctor. Thank you for the offer." "Great. You can start next Saturday, if your parents agree." Carl and Stephen enthusiastically agreed. They realized that Dr. Lewis was offering a unique opportunity for Michael's intellectual development. Dr. Lewis paid for the diagnosis and left with his Camry running perfectly. Before leaving, he handed them his business card and reiterated the invitation to the weekend classes. "Stephen," Dr. Lewis said before departing, "you have a special responsibility with this boy. He has the potential to go very far." "We're starting to understand that, Doctor. Take good care of him. Talents like his come once in a generation." After Dr. Lewis left, the shop fell into a contemplative silence. Everyone was processing the magnitude of what had just happened. An experienced engineer had not only validated Michael's talent, but had offered to mentor him. "Michael," Stephen said, "do you understand what just happened?" "I think so, Uncle. Dr. Lewis wants to teach me about engineering." "It's more than that, son," Carl explained. "He sees potential in you that goes far beyond automotive. Mechanics. And that's a good thing." "It's wonderful," Jack replied. "It means you could have a bright future ahead." Michael smiled, but there was a thoughtful expression on his face. "Uncle Stephen, Dad, even if I study engineering, can I still work with cars?" "Of course you can," Stephen answered. "In fact, it would be even better. You'd be a mechanic with an engineer's knowledge. Or an engineer with a mechanic's hands-on skills," Carl added. The prospect of combining theoretical knowledge with practical skills excited Michael immensely. He began to see a future where he could use his natural talent even more effectively. The following Saturday, Michael visited Dr. Lewis at his home for the first time. The retired engineer lived in a spacious house on the outskirts of town, with an office filled with technical books and engineering equipment. "Welcome, Michael," Dr. Lewis greeted, ushering the boy into his office. "Ready for your first engineering lesson?" "Ready, Doctor. Where do we start?" "We'll start with the basics, principles of applied physics in mechanics." Dr. Lewis began explaining fundamental concepts like force, energy, motion, and their applications in mechanical systems. Michael absorbed the information like a sponge, making connections between theory and his hands-on experience in the shop. "Doctor," Michael said during a break, "when an engine loses power, is it because energy is being lost somewhere?" "Exactly. The energy that should be converted into motion is being wasted or poorly utilized." "And when I spotted that cracked hose in the Mustang, what was happening in terms of energy?" "Loss of pressure means loss of potential energy in the system. The engine couldn't make full use of the available fuel energy." Dr. Lewis's explanations gave scientific context to Michael's practical observations. The boy was beginning to understand not just the how of automotive problems, but also the why. "This is fascinating, Doctor. Does that mean everything I see in the shop has a scientific explanation?" "Absolutely everything. Physics, chemistry, thermodynamics. Cars are moving science labs." The Saturday lessons with Dr. Lewis became the highlight of Michael's week. He always arrived eager to learn new concepts and make fresh connections between theory and practice. Meanwhile, back at the shop, Michael's reputation kept growing. Customers came from neighboring towns specifically to have their problems diagnosed by the prodigy boy. Johnson & Sons was enjoying its best period in years. However, this success didn't go unnoticed by Roger Sanders. The owner of the competing shop grew increasingly irritated by the loss of customers to the Johnson brothers. On a Thursday afternoon, Roger decided to take more drastic action. He arrived at the shop with his own car, pretending to be a regular customer. "Good afternoon," said Roger, stepping out of his black Accord. "I heard you have a diagnostics expert here." Stephen immediately recognized Roger, but chose to treat him professionally. "Good afternoon, Roger. How can I help you?" "My car has a problem no one can figure out," I thought I'd give you a shot. What's the issue? It's burning way too much fuel, but no mechanic can find the cause. Stephen called Michael, who was working on the other side of the shop. Michael, can you come take a look at this problem? Michael approached, not recognizing Roger as the man who had made threats weeks earlier. Good afternoon, sir. Can you explain your car's issue? Sure, it's using too much gas, but mechanics say everything's fine. Michael asked several questions about the car's behavior, driving patterns, and specific symptoms. Roger answered evasively, giving vague and sometimes contradictory information. After a few minutes of trying to get clear answers, Michael sensed something was off. The man seemed more interested in testing him than solving an actual problem. Sir, Michael said respectfully, to give an accurate diagnosis, I need you to be more specific about the symptoms. What kind of specifics? For example, does the excessive fuel consumption happen in the city, on the highway, or both? Is the engine running rough? Any smoke from the exhaust? Roger hadn't expected such technical questions from a kid and started stumbling over his improvised answers. Well, it's mostly in the city, I think, and sometimes there's a little smoke from the exhaust. What color is the smoke? Color, white, I guess. Michael asked a few more technical questions, making it clear Roger didn't know enough to keep up the act. Sir, Michael finally said, may I suggest you observe the symptoms more closely and come back when you have more precise details. Without reliable data, any diagnosis would just be a guess. Michael's mature professional response frustrated Roger, who had hoped to catch the boy in a mistake or expose his incompetence. You can't figure out the problem, Roger taunted. Not with the vague information you've given, Michael replied calmly. Accurate diagnosis requires accurate data. Stephen watched the exchange with growing suspicion. Roger's behavior was clearly provocative, and his answers about the car were too evasive. Roger, Stephen said, what's really wrong with your car? What do you mean? You're giving contradictory and vague answers. It seems like there's no real problem at all. Roger realized his act had been exposed. Look, Stephen, I just wanted to see if the kid was really as good as they say. And he seems to know what he's doing. Of course he does. Why would you doubt him? Because he's a kid, Stephen. He shouldn't be doing an adult's job. Roger's true intentions were finally clear. He wasn't a customer. He was a competitor trying to discredit Michael. Roger, Stephen said firmly, if you came here to cause trouble, I suggest you leave. I'm not causing trouble. I'm just questioning whether it's right to use a kid to attract customers. Carl, who had noticed the tension, walked over. Roger, what exactly do you want? I want you to stop using this kid as false advertising. False advertising? Carl snapped. My son has real talent. This isn't advertising. Talent? He couldn't even diagnose my car's problem. Because there isn't one, Stephen shot back. You came here with lies to try to catch Michael in a mistake. The argument was getting heated and other. Mechanics in the shop gathered to see what was happening. Michael watched everything with a mix of confusion and sadness. Everyone, Michael interrupted. Can I speak? Of course, son, said Carl. Michael turned directly to Roger. Sir, if you don't believe in my ability, that's fine. Not everyone has to believe, but you don't need to come here and cause trouble for my family. The maturity in... Michael's response even surprised Roger. You're too young to understand the situation, boy. Maybe I am young, but I understand that you're trying to hurt our work because you're jealous of our success. Jealous? Roger turned red. I'm not jealous of... Then why are you here? Michael cut in. If you don't need our services, why waste your time with us? Michael's simple but direct question exposed the weakness in Roger's stance. He really had no legitimate reason to be there other than to stir up trouble. Listen here, kid. Roger, Stephen interrupted firmly. Don't talk to my nephew like that. If you have a complaint, take it up with me. My complaint is that you're using a child to do work that should be done by qualified professionals. Michael only gives opinions on diagnostics. All the work is done by adult professionals, Carl explained. Even so, it's not appropriate. Why not? Asked Jack, joining the conversation. He has a natural talent, and he's helping people. Because he's underage. And that stops him from using his brain, Jack shot back. The argument was reaching a standstill, with Roger trying to hold a position that was getting harder to defend. Michael decided to take action that surprised everyone present. "Mr. Roger," Michael said calmly, "if you have a real problem with your car, I'd be happy to try and help. But if you came here just to cause trouble, I'm asking you to leave and let us work in peace." "You're kicking me out?" "I'm asking you to be honest about your intentions." Roger was speechless. Being confronted with such maturity by a 10-year-old was something he wasn't prepared for. "Fine," Roger finally said. "But this isn't over. I'll file an official complaint about you." "A complaint about what?" asked Stephen. "About us helping customers solve problems quickly. About improper use of child labor." "Then file your complaint," said Carl. "We have clear consciences." Roger left the shop clearly frustrated that he hadn't managed to cause the trouble he'd hoped for. His attempt to discredit Michael had backfired, only proving the boy's maturity and competence even more. After Roger left, the shop fell silent for a few moments. Everyone was processing what had just happened. "Michael," said Stephen, "you handled that very well." "Thank you, Uncle, but I'm worried about this official complaint threat." "Don't worry, son," Carl reassured him. "We're not doing anything wrong. What if he actually files a complaint?" "Then we explain the situation to whoever investigates," said Jack. "Any sensible person will see you're helping, not being exploited." Roger's threat, though concerning, didn't intimidate the Johnson family. They knew they were acting ethically, and that Michael was benefiting, not being harmed by his involvement in the shop. A few days later, Roger's threat materialized in an unexpected way. On Tuesday morning, a social worker from the city showed up at the shop to investigate a report of child labor. "Good morning," greeted the social worker, a 40-year-old woman named Sandra Olson. "I'm from the Social Services Department of the City Hall. We received a complaint about child labor at this establishment." Stephen felt his stomach drop. Even though he knew he wasn't doing anything wrong, the presence of an authority figure investigating his shop was intimidating. "Good morning, Miss Sandra. I'm Stephen Johnson, the owner of the shop. How can I help you?" "I need to verify the working conditions of a minor who is reportedly employed here." "Miss Sandra, there must be a misunderstanding. We don't have any minors working here. The complaint specifically mentions a 10-year-old child who performs automotive diagnostics." Stephen took a deep breath, preparing to explain the complex situation involving Michael. "The child you're referring to is my nephew, Michael. He does occasionally help with diagnostics, but he's not an employee. He doesn't receive a salary and is always supervised by adults." "May I speak with the child?" "Of course, Michael," Stephen called. Michael approached nervously. He understood that this visit was related to Roger's threats and felt responsible for the trouble his family was facing. "Hi, Miss Sandra," Michael greeted politely. "Hello, Michael. I'm a social worker, and I came to talk to you about your work here at the shop." "I don't work here, Miss Sandra. I just help my dad and uncle sometimes." "How exactly do you help?" "Sometimes they ask me what I think about car problems. Then I give my opinion, but they're always the ones who fix them." Sandra asked several questions about Michael's activities, his schedule, whether he was paid, if he was forced to work, and if he missed school to be at the shop. "Michael," Sandra asked, "do you enjoy helping here?" "I really do, Miss Sandra. I love cars, and I like helping people." "And do your parents force you to stay here?" "No, Miss Sandra. I come here because I want to. My parents always say school is more important." "Do you go to school every day?" "Yes, I only come here after school and on weekends," Sandra asked. More questions, both to Michael and the adults present. She inspected the shop, checked safety conditions, and observed how Michael interacted with the mechanics. During the inspection, Dr. Paul arrived with his Beetle for routine maintenance. Seeing the commotion in the shop, he approached curiously. "Good afternoon, everyone. Is something going on?" "Good afternoon, Dr. Paul," Stephen greeted. "It's just a routine inspection." Sandra introduced herself to Dr. Paul and explained the reason for her visit. The retired doctor immediately stood up for the Johnson family. "Social worker, may I give my testimony about this boy?" "Of course, sir. I'm a retired doctor and have been a customer of this shop for years. Michael helped me solve a problem with my car that other mechanics couldn't figure out. He shows exceptional talent and always acts under adult supervision. Do you believe the child is being exploited? Absolutely not. On the contrary, I see a family nurturing a natural talent in a responsible way. Dr. Paul's testimony was important in shaping Sandra's opinion of the situation. She spoke with other customers at the shop, all of whom confirmed that Michael was treated with care and respect. "Stephen," Sandra said after completing her investigation, "based on what I observed today, I don't see evidence of inappropriate child labor." "That's good to hear, Miss Sandra. However, I'd like to make a few recommendations to ensure the situation remains appropriate." "What kind of recommendations?" "First, formally document that Michael is a volunteer, not an employee. Second, set clear boundaries on hours to ensure it doesn't interfere with his studies. Third, always maintain adult supervision when he's in the shop." "We already do all that, Mrs. Sandra, but we can formalize it better." "Great. I'll write a positive report, but I recommend you keep an eye on these guidelines." Sandra got ready to leave, but turned to Michael once more. "Michael, remember, studying is your top priority. Helping out here at the shop can be a hobby, but it should never interfere with school." "I understand, Mrs. Sandra. My parents always tell me that. And if you ever don't want to help here anymore, or if someone forces you to do something you don't want to, you can come see me at the City Hall." "Thank you, Mrs. Sandra." After the social worker left, the shop fell silent for a few moments. Everyone was relieved the investigation had ended well, but the episode had been stressful. "Michael," said Stephen, "how did you feel with all those questions?" "A little nervous, Uncle, but I understood she just wanted to make sure I was okay." "And do you understand why this investigation happened?" "Because of Mr. Roger, right?" "Probably, yes. But the important thing is we showed we're not doing anything wrong." Dr. Paul approached the group. "Stephen, can I make a suggestion?" "Of course, Doctor. Maybe it'd be a good idea for you to document Michael's activities better. It could protect you from future unfounded complaints." "How so, Doctor?" "Keep a record of when he helps, what kind of help he provides, and always note who supervised. If someone files another complaint, you'll have documentation to defend yourselves." Dr. Paul's suggestion was sensible. Stephen decided to implement a simple system to log Michael's activities at the shop. In the following days, life at the shop returned to normal, but with more care taken to document Michael's involvement. Every time he helped with a diagnosis, someone noted it in a special notebook. A week after the incident with the social worker, a customer arrived who would bring new challenges. It was Mrs. Teresa, a 72-year-old widow who lived alone on the outskirts of town. "Good afternoon, everyone," greeted Mrs. Teresa, struggling to step out of her old white Fiesta. "My car's acting up, and I really need it to get to the doctor." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Teresa," replied Stephen. "What's the problem?" "It won't start. I turn the key, and nothing happens." Stephen immediately checked the battery, which was completely dead. He connected jumper cables and managed to start the engine, but noticed something was draining the battery when the car was off. "Mrs. Teresa, have you been leaving any lights on or the radio playing when you get out of the car?" "No." "Mr. Stephen, I always turn everything off. Then there must be an electrical issue draining power even when the car's off." Intermittent electrical problems were among the hardest to diagnose. It could be any component in the electrical system causing a parasitic drain. Stephen and Jack began a systematic check, testing fuses, relays, and circuits. It was a time-consuming job that could take hours or even days. Michael watched from a distance, but his mind was analyzing the available information. Mrs. Teresa had mentioned something the adults seemed to have overlooked. She always turned everything off when leaving the car. "Dad," Michael called discreetly. "What is it, son?" "Mrs. Teresa said she always turns everything off when she leaves the car. That might be a clue." "How so?" "If she's used to turning things off manually, maybe there's some equipment that doesn't shut off automatically when it should." Carl considered his son's observation. "Like what?" "I don't know. An old radio, a cigarette lighter, something that stays on even after turning off the ignition." Michael's suggestion made sense. Carl approached the Fiesta and carefully checked all the electrical accessories. On the dashboard, he discovered that the old radio didn't actually turn off completely with the ignition. There was a small LED that stayed lit, indicating the device was constantly drawing power. "Michael," Carl called out, "I think you were right again." "Really, Dad?" "The radio doesn't shut off completely. It's always draining a little power." Stephen came over to check the discovery. "Wow, it's true. The radio is permanently on standby." The solution was simple. Either replace the radio with a model that turned off properly or install a manual switch to cut power to the device completely. "Mrs. Teresa," Stephen explained, "the problem is your radio. It doesn't turn off all the way and keeps draining the battery." "Oh, Stephen, this radio is very old. It belonged to my late husband. He loved listening to music while driving. The sentimental detail about the radio complicated things. Mrs. Teresa clearly had an emotional attachment to it and didn't want to simply replace it." "Mrs. Teresa," Michael suggested respectfully, "we can install a small button for you to turn the radio off completely when you leave the car. That way you can keep your husband's radio." Michael's proposed solution was perfect. Mrs. Teresa could preserve the sentimental memory while fixing the technical issue. "What a smart boy," Mrs. Teresa said, smiling at Michael. "That's a great idea." Stephen installed a small discrete switch on the dashboard, allowing Mrs. Teresa to cut power to the radio when needed. The problem was solved without sacrificing the sentimental value of the device. "Thank you so much, everyone," Mrs. Teresa said as she paid for the service. "Especially you, Michael. You understood the radio was special to me." "You're welcome, Mrs. Teresa. I hope you have many more years driving and listening to the songs your husband loved." Michael's kindness deeply touched Mrs. Teresa, who left the shop moved and grateful. "Michael," Stephen said after Mrs. Teresa left, "you didn't just solve the technical problem. You understood the emotional one too." "What do you mean, Uncle?" "You realized the radio was important to her and found a solution that respected that." "Oh, yeah. I figured if it were a memory of my dad, I wouldn't want to throw it away either." The empathy Michael showed impressed all the adults present. He was developing not just technical skills, but also human sensitivity. In the following weeks, Michael's reputation continued to grow, not just for his technical competence, but also for his maturity and sensitivity in dealing with customers. A month after the incident with Mrs. Teresa, a completely new challenge arrived at the shop. Professor Anthony returned, this time accompanied by a colleague from the State University in the capital. "Good afternoon, everyone," Professor Anthony greeted. "I'd like to introduce Professor Marcus Harrington from the Mechanical Engineering Department at the university." "Pleasure to meet you all," said Professor Marcus, a 50-year-old man with an academic demeanor. "Professor Anthony told me about a young man with exceptional skills in automotive diagnostics." Stephen immediately grew nervous at the presence of a university professor. "Professor, Michael is just a boy who loves cars." "I understand, but I'd like to meet him if possible." Michael was called over and approached timidly. The presence of a university professor was intimidating even for someone with his confidence. "Hello, Michael," Professor Marcus greeted. "I'm an engineering professor. Professor Anthony told me you have a special talent for solving mechanical problems." "Hi, Professor. I like cars and sometimes I can help when they have problems." "Interesting. Can I ask you some questions about how you think when diagnosing a problem?" "Of course, Professor." Professor Mark began asking surprisingly complex, technical questions about automotive systems, operating principles, and diagnostic methods. Michael answered naturally, showing an intuitive understanding of advanced concepts. "Michael," said Professor Mark after several minutes of conversation, "how did you learn about thermodynamics applied to internal combustion engines?" "Thermodynamics?" Michael looked confused. "You just explained the Otto cycle perfectly, including the relationships between pressure, temperature, and volume." "I didn't know that had a name. I just explained how it works inside the engine." Professor Mark turned to Professor Anthony with a look of astonishment. "Anthony, this boy has an intuitive grasp of concepts I teach to college students." "That's exactly what I tried to tell you." "Michael," said Professor Mark, "have you ever thought about studying engineering?" "Sometimes, Professor. Dr. Lewis has been teaching me some engineering basics on weekends." "Dr. Lewis Fletcher?" "Yes, do you know him? I do, an excellent engineer. What has he been teaching you? Physics principles, how energy turns into motion, why materials behave differently. Professor Mark grew increasingly impressed. Michael, I'd like to make you an offer. What kind of offer, Professor? I'd like to invite you to visit our university. We have engineering labs that might interest you. The proposal left everyone surprised. A college professor was inviting a 10-year-old boy to tour engineering labs. Professor, Stephen interrupted, Michael is still too young for... Stephen, with all due respect, talent like this has no age, said Professor Mark. At the university, we already work with programs for gifted youth. Gifted, Carl repeated. Yes, children with exceptional abilities who need the right intellectual stimulation. The word gifted made the Johnson family realize Michael's talent might be even more special than they thought. Professor, Michael said shyly, can I ask what's in those labs? We have disassembled engines for study, measuring equipment, simulators and experiments that demonstrate the principles you already understand intuitively. That sounds really interesting. Michael, said Professor Anthony, it would be like an educational field trip. You could see how the science you learn in school applies to engineering. The idea began to excite Michael. The chance to see advanced equipment and experiments sparked his natural curiosity. Dad, Uncle Stephen, would you let me go? Carl and Stephen exchanged glances, torn between pride and concern. It was a unique opportunity, but it also represented a world very different from what they knew. Professors, Carl said, when would this visit be? It could be next Saturday if you agree, replied Professor Mark. And of course a parent could come along. I'd like to go with Michael, Carl said immediately. Perfect. Then it's settled? Stephen still hesitated. Professors, do you really think Michael has talent for all this? Stephen, Professor Mark said seriously, in 20 years of teaching engineering, I've rarely seen someone with the intuitive understanding your nephew shows. It would be irresponsible not to offer opportunities to develop that talent, but he's just a child. Exactly why it's important to act now. Exceptional talents need to be nurtured early. The persistence of the university professors finally convinced Stephen. All right, Michael can go, but with his father accompanying him. Excellent, said Professor Marcus. I'll prepare a special visit for you. After the professors left, the workshop was filled with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The prospect of visiting a university was thrilling but also intimidating. Michael, Stephen said, do you understand what just happened? I think so, Uncle. University professors think I'm smart. Not just smart, son, Carl corrected. They think you have exceptional talent. And is that good? It's wonderful, Jack replied. It means you might have opportunities most people never get. That night, the Johnson family had a long conversation about Michael's future. For the first time, they realized that the boy's talent could take him far beyond the family workshop. Carl, Helen said during dinner, do you think we're ready for all this? I don't know, Helen, but I know we can't waste the opportunities coming Michael's way. What if he becomes more interested in university than the workshop? Then we support his decision. What matters is that he's happy and fulfills his potential. Michael listened to his parents with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was excited about the possibilities opening up. On the other, he feared it might mean leaving behind the workshop he loved so much. Dad, Mom, Michael said. Can I say something? Of course, son. Even if I study engineering, I can still work with cars, right? Of course you can, Michael. In fact, it would be even better. You'd be an engineer who also understands the practical side. So I don't have to choose between one or the other. No, son, you can combine both. His parents' reassurance eased Michael's worries. He began to see that maybe he could have the best of both worlds, advanced theoretical knowledge and hands-on work in the workshop. The following Saturday, Michael and Carl headed to the State University in the capital. It was Michael's first time visiting a college campus, and the size and complexity of the place amazed him. Professor Marcus greeted them at the entrance and led them on a tour of the mechanical engineering labs. Michael was fascinated by the equipment, disassembled engines, and ongoing experiments. This is our engine lab, Professor Marcus explained, showing a room filled with different types of engines in various stages of disassembly. Here, students learn how each component works. "It's incredible, Professor," Michael said, carefully observing every detail. "This engine here has a problem our third-year students have been trying to diagnose for 2 weeks. Want to take a look?" Michael approached the engine and examined it closely. It was a 4-cylinder engine similar to the ones he saw in the workshop, but with additional instrumentation for measurements. "What's the problem they're trying to solve?" Michael asked. "Inconsistent power loss. Sometimes it runs fine, other times it loses significant power." Michael studied the engine for a few minutes, focusing on details that caught his eye. Something about the ignition system connections didn't seem right. "Professor," Michael said hesitantly, "can I give my opinion?" "Of course, that's why you're here." "I think it might be an issue with the ignition coil. The connection seems intermittent." Professor Marcus checked the area Michael pointed out and found exactly the problem the boy had identified. A wire from the coil had an inconsistent connection. "Incredible," Professor Marcus murmured. "My third-year students couldn't see this in 2 weeks, and you spotted it in 2 minutes." "It was luck, Professor." "It wasn't luck, Michael. It was trained observation and technical intuition." Michael's demonstration in the university setting caused a stir among the professors and students present. Soon, a small crowd gathered, curious to meet the prodigy boy who had solved a problem that stumped advanced students. "Professor Marcus," said an engineering student, "how did he see it so quickly?" "Natural talent combined with hands-on experience," Professor Marcus explained. "It's exactly the kind of skill we try to develop in you." The tour continued through the materials labs, where Michael learned about the properties of different metals and alloys used in engine construction. He asked smart questions and quickly grasped complex concepts. In the thermodynamics lab, Professor Marcus demonstrated experiments showing the principles of internal combustion engines. Michael was fascinated to see in practice what Dr. Lewis had explained in theory. "Michael," Professor Marcus said during a break, "how do you feel seeing all this?" "It's amazing, Professor. It's like seeing what happens behind the things I already know." "Exactly. Engineering explains the why behind what you already know how to do." "Professor, can I ask something?" "Of course." "To study engineering." "Here, would I have to move to the city?" "Not necessarily. We have special programs for exceptional students. You could start with weekend classes and later, when you're older, decide about moving." The possibility of starting college gradually reassured both Michael and Carl. He wouldn't have to leave his hometown life behind completely. "Professor," Carl said, "do you really think my son has the potential to study here?" "Carl, your son doesn't just have potential. He has exceptional talent that should be nurtured in the right academic environment. But he's still very young. That's exactly why I'm suggesting a gradual program. He could start by auditing some basic classes, joining supervised lab projects without formal pressure." The offer was tempting. Michael would get advanced knowledge without upending his current life. "Dad," Michael said, "what do you think?" "Son, if this is what you want, we'll try it." "I do, Dad, but only if it doesn't interfere with my time at the shop." "Of course it won't. In fact, it'll make you even better at helping there." The university visit ended with Professor Marcus formally inviting Michael to join a special program for gifted students. It would start as a 1-day-a-month commitment, gradually increasing based on his interest and availability. On the drive back home, Carl and Michael talked about everything they'd seen and heard. "Dad, do you think I can keep up with college students?" "Son, you already proved you can. You solved a problem third years couldn't. But they know so much more than I do. They know more theory, but you have practical intuition they're still learning. It's strange to think I might be different from other kids." "You are different, Michael. But that's a blessing." "Not a problem." When they got home, Helen was eager to hear about the visit. Michael described the lab's experiments and Professor Marcus's proposal in detail. "My goodness," Helen said, "our son really is special." "We always knew he was smart," Carl said, "but now we're seeing just how much." "And now?" Helen asked. "How do we handle all this?" "With patience and support," Carl replied. Let Michael explore these opportunities at his own pace." The following Monday, Michael returned to the shop with renewed energy. His visit to the university had broadened his perspective on future possibilities, but also reinforced his love for the practical application of knowledge. "So, Michael," Jack asked, "how was the university?" "It was amazing, Mr. Jack. I saw so many things that explain why cars work the way they do. And are you going to study there?" "I'll be part of a special program once a month, but I'll keep helping out here at the shop." "That's good. We wouldn't want to lose our consultant." The news about Michael's participation in the university program spread quickly through town. Some people were impressed, others skeptical, and a few even jealous. Roger Sanders, the owner of the competing shop, was particularly bothered when he heard the news. He saw it as just another attempt by the Johnson family to use Michael to draw attention and customers. One Thursday afternoon, Roger decided to take more drastic action. He arrived at the shop accompanied by Mark Sullivan, an experienced mechanic, from his team supposedly to challenge Michael's skills. "Good afternoon, Stephen," Roger greeted with false politeness. "I came here with Mark to meet this famous boy prodigy." "Good afternoon, Roger," Stephen replied cautiously. "How can I help you?" "Well, Mark here has a problem with his car that no mechanic has been able to fix. We thought we'd give Michael a chance." Stephen immediately suspected Roger's intentions. "What kind of problem?" "It's complicated," said Mark, a 50-year-old man with an arrogant expression. "I doubt a kid could figure it out." The provocation was obvious, but Stephen decided to accept the challenge to show off Michael's skills. "Michael," Stephen called, "can you come here?" Michael approached and immediately sensed the tension in the air. He recognized Roger as the man who had made threats before. "Michael," Roger said with false enthusiasm, "this is Mark. He's got a really tricky problem with his car." "Good afternoon, Mr. Mark," Michael greeted politely. "What's the issue with your car?" "It's a Golf that sometimes loses power drastically, but only on hot days. When it cools down, it goes back to normal." Michael asked several detailed questions about the symptoms, but Mark gave vague and sometimes contradictory answers, just as Roger had done before. After a few minutes of trying to get clear information, Michael recognized the familiar pattern, another setup by people trying to discredit him. "Mr. Mark," Michael said respectfully, "to give an accurate diagnosis for a problem that only happens under specific conditions, I'd need to see the car running under those conditions." "What do you mean?" "If the problem only happens on hot days, I need to see the car running when it's hot. Otherwise, any diagnosis would just be a guess." Mark didn't expect such a technically solid response. "But can't you guess what the problem is?" "I don't guess, sir. I diagnose based on observation and reliable data." Michael's professional answer frustrated Roger and Mark's expectations. They had hoped to catch the boy making a hasty claim they could use to discredit him. "See, Roger?" Mark said loudly. "The kid can't fix it." "It's not that I can't fix it," Michael corrected calmly. "It's that I won't make irresponsible diagnoses based on incomplete information." Stephen stepped closer to the conversation, proud of his nephew's maturity. "Mark," Stephen said, "if you really want a diagnosis for your car's problem, bring it here on a hot day when the issue is happening." "Oh, but that would be too complicated." "Then there's no real problem," concluded Jack, who had stepped closer to listen to the conversation. Roger and Mark's charade was falling apart. It was becoming increasingly clear that they had no real issue. They just wanted to create difficulties for Michael. "Listen here," said Mark, growing irritated. "I didn't come here to be questioned. And we're not here to diagnose problems based on made-up stories," retorted Carl, who had arrived and quickly grasped the situation. The tension was rising, and Michael decided to take action in a way that surprised everyone present. "Gentlemen, Roger and Mark," Michael said in a firm but respectful voice. "You've come here twice now with fake problems, trying to catch me in a mistake. That's neither fair nor professional." "Who says they're fake problems?" protested Roger. "The information you give is always vague and contradictory, and you never actually want to solve anything. You just want to test me." Michael's observation was sharp and put Roger on the defensive. "Listen here, kid." "Roger," Stephen interrupted firmly. "If you came here just to stir up trouble, I suggest you leave. I have every right to be here. This is a commercial establishment. You have the right if you come as a legitimate customer, But if you're just here to cause trouble, you're not welcome. The argument was heating up when someone arrived at the shop who would completely shift the dynamic of the situation. It was Dr. Mitchell, who had returned for routine maintenance on his Beetle. "Good afternoon, everyone," Dr. Mitchell greeted, but he immediately sensed the tension in the air. Did something happen? "Just a little visit from some colleagues from the competition," Stephen explained diplomatically. Dr. Mitchell recognized Roger and understood the situation at once. "Roger, don't you have work at your own shop?" "Dr. Mitchell, I just came to meet the famous prodigy everyone's talking about." "You've met him now. What's your impression?" "Well, he seems to know what he's doing, but he's still too young to be taken seriously." "Interesting," said Dr. Mitchell with an ironic smile, "because he fixed an issue with my car that other older mechanics couldn't. That was luck, Doctor." "Roger, as a doctor, I've learned to recognize genuine talent, and I can assure you, Michael has real skill, not just luck." Dr. Mitchell's testimony carried weight in the community, and Roger realized he was losing the argument. "Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion," Roger said evasively. "Exactly," agreed Dr. Mitchell, "and my opinion, based on professional experience, is that you're wasting your time trying to undermine obvious talent." Dr. Mitchell's intervention effectively put an end to Roger and Mark's attempt to provoke Michael. They left the shop clearly frustrated at having failed to discredit him. "Dr. Mitchell," Michael said after the troublemakers had gone, "thank you for standing up for me." "No need to thank me, Michael. I only spoke the truth." "Doctor," said Stephen, "doesn't this kind of provocation bother you?" "Stephen, envy is the price of success. The more you prosper, the more people will try to bring you down. And how do we deal with that? By continuing to do the right work and ignoring the provocations. The truth always prevails in the end." Dr. Mitchell's advice reassured the Johnson family. They realized that Roger's provocations were actually a sign they were on the right path. In the weeks that followed, Johnson & Sons continued to thrive. Michael's participation in the university program brought even more prestige, and customers came from increasingly distant towns. A month after the incident with Roger and Mark, the shop received a customer who would present the biggest technical challenge Michael had ever faced. It was Albert Manning, a 55-year-old businessman who owned a vintage Mercedes-Benz. The car had been recently restored, but was having mysterious issues that had stumped several specialized mechanics. "Good afternoon," Albert greeted, stepping out of his impeccable navy blue Mercedes. "I heard you have an expert who handles tough diagnostics." "Good afternoon, Mr. Albert," Stephen replied. "How can we help you?" "This Mercedes is my passion. I spent a fortune restoring it, but it has problems no one can solve." Albert explained that the car usually ran perfectly, but occasionally had complex issues. Sudden loss of power, rough idling, and even unexplained stalls. "I've taken it to 3 Mercedes specialists," Albert continued. "Each gave a different diagnosis and none of the fixes worked." "What kind of repairs were done?" Stephen asked. "They replaced the ignition system, fuel system, and part of the electrical system. I spent over $10,000, and the problem persists." The complexity of the case intimidated Stephen and Jack. Older Mercedes-Benz models had more sophisticated systems than regular cars, and intermittent issues were the hardest to diagnose. "Mr. Albert," Stephen said hesitantly, "we don't have much experience with Mercedes. Maybe you should try a specialized shop." "I already did, Stephen. 3 specialized shops failed. That's why I came here. I heard you have different methods." Michael listened from a distance, intrigued by the complexity of the problem. A car that mostly ran well but occasionally had multiple issues suggested something very specific. "Uncle Stephen," Michael called, discreetly. "What is it, Michael?" "Can I ask Mr. Albert a few questions?" Stephen hesitated. The Mercedes was clearly valuable, and the responsibility of working on it was daunting. "Mr. Albert," Stephen said, "my nephew would like to ask a few questions, but he's very young. Would you mind?" "Not at all. Any ideas are welcome at this point." Michael approached respectfully. "Mr. Albert, can I ask when exactly the problems happen?" "What do you mean?" "Is there a pattern? Does it happen more after driving for a long time, under certain conditions or randomly? Albert considered the question carefully. Now that you mention it, it seems to happen more after driving for a while, especially on hot days. And when it happens, is it always the same issue or different ones? Different ones. Sometimes tire's loss of power, sometimes rough idling, sometimes it even stalls completely. Interesting, Michael murmured, processing the information. What do you think, son? Can I see the engine, Mr. Albert? Albert popped the hood of the Mercedes, revealing an impeccably restored engine. Michael observed carefully, paying attention not just to the components, but also to the overall layout of the system. After a few minutes of silent inspection, Michael noticed something that caught his eye. Several electronic components were near the exhaust manifold, an area that got very hot during prolonged operation. Mr. Albert, Michael said hesitantly, can I share my thoughts? Of course. I think it might be an issue with electronic components overheating. How so? You said the problems happen more after driving for a long time, especially on hot days. That suggests something is affected by heat. Albert looked intrigued. But the engine doesn't overheat. The temperature always stays normal. It's not the engine overheating, sir. It's the electronic components. They can malfunction when they get too hot, even if the engine temperature is normal. Michael's explanation made sense to Albert, and that would explain why the problems are different each time. Exactly. Depending on which electronic component is affected by the heat, the symptom changes. Stephen stepped closer to the conversation, impressed by Michael's reasoning. How can we verify if this is correct? We need to identify which electronic components are in positions that could suffer from excessive heat, Michael explained. Albert grew increasingly convinced that Michael had correctly identified the issue. How can we fix it? First, we need to confirm that this is indeed the problem, said Stephen. Then, we can either relocate sensitive components or install thermal protection. Gentlemen, Albert said, none of the specialized shops considered heat affecting the electronics. How did a 10-year-old boy think of this? Because I don't have any preconceptions about what can or can't be the problem, Michael replied simply. I just analyze the symptoms and look for logical explanations. Michael's answer deeply impressed Albert. He realized the boy's youth was actually an advantage because he wasn't limited by preconceived notions. Can I leave the car here for you to investigate this theory? Albert asked. Of course, Mr. Albert, Stephen answered, but I can't guarantee we'll solve it. At least you came up with a different idea. That's already more than the other shops did. Albert left his Mercedes at the shop and walked away with cautious but optimistic expectations. For the first time in months, someone had offered a logical explanation for his car's mysterious issues. After Albert left, Stephen turned to Michael with a mix of admiration and concern. Michael, are you sure about your theory? I have a good feeling about it, Uncle, but we'll only know by testing. What if you're wrong? Then we'll consider other possibilities. But I think this hypothesis is worth investigating. First, the investigation of the Mercedes became a special project at the shop. Stephen and Jack worked alongside Michael to identify all the electronic components that could be affected by excessive heat. They discovered that during the restoration, some electronics had been repositioned too close to the exhaust manifold. During prolonged operation, especially on hot days, these components reached temperatures that impaired their function. The solution involved relocating some components to cooler spots and installing thermal protection for those that couldn't be moved. A week later, Albert returned to test his Mercedes. The car ran perfectly, even after an hour of operation on a particularly hot day. Incredible, Albert said, clearly moved. Finally, I can drive my Mercedes without fear of it breaking down on the road. That's great, Mr. Albert, Michael said, smiling. Michael, can I ask how you knew it was a heat issue? Mostly from the pattern of the symptoms, sir. Problems that only happen after extended use are usually heat or vibration related. And where did you learn that? By observing many cars with similar issues. Albert paid for the service and left a generous tip for the whole team. Before leaving, he asked a question that surprised everyone. Stephen, have you ever considered specializing in classic and collector cars? No, Mr. Albert, we don't have enough experience. But you have something better than experience: exceptional logical reasoning. With Michael on the team, you could solve problems that have stumped specialized shops. Albert's suggestion planted an interesting seed in Stephen's mind. Specializing in difficult cases could be a way to further set the shop apart from the competition. "What do you think, Michael?" asked Stephen. "Would you like to work with classic cars?" "I'd love to, Uncle. Old cars are like puzzles. Each one is unique and has its own secrets." The successful resolution of the Mercedes problem marked a turning point for Johnson & Sons. The news spread quickly among classic car collectors, and soon the shop began receiving clients with rare vehicles and complex issues. 2 months after the Mercedes episode, the shop had become the regional go-to for difficult diagnostics. Michael continued participating in the university program, always expanding his theoretical knowledge to complement his practical skills. However, not everything was smooth sailing. The shop's growing success was creating unexpected pressures in Michael's life. He was constantly being called upon to solve problems, give opinions, and even attend car-related events. One such pressure came in the form of an invitation to participate in a classic car exhibition in the capital. The organizers wanted Michael to perform diagnostic demonstrations for the public. "Michael," Stephen said, showing him the invitation. "What do you think?" "I don't know, Uncle. It feels a little strange to put on a show for people. But it would be a great opportunity to showcase our work. I'd rather help people who really need it, not put on performances." Michael's reluctance to participate in promotional events showed his maturity and genuine focus on helping rather than seeking fame. "You're right, Michael," Carl agreed. "Our focus should be on real work, not publicity." The decision to decline the exhibition invitation was the right one. In the following months, the shop continued growing based on solid reputation and service quality, not superficial advertising. 6 months after the Mercedes episode, Johnson & Sons was thriving. Their clientele had expanded to include not just locals, but also collectors and car enthusiasts from across the region. Michael, now 11, had matured significantly both technically and emotionally. His participation in the university program kept broadening his knowledge, and his practical skills continued to impress clients and colleagues alike. However, a new situation was about to test the Johnson family in an unexpected way. Dr. Louis Fletcher, the retired engineer who had become Michael's mentor, arrived at the shop on a Monday morning with a concerned expression. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Louis greeted. "I need to talk to you about something important." "Good morning, Dr. Louis," Stephen replied. "What's going on?" "I've received a proposal that might affect our plans for Michael." "What kind of proposal?" "An engineering firm in New York City heard about Michael's talent through university contacts. They're offering a full scholarship program." The news left everyone silent. A full scholarship in New York City meant extraordinary opportunities, but it would also bring drastic changes to the family's life. "Dr. Louis," Carl said cautiously, "what kind of program is this?" "It would be specialized education focused on engineering, starting as early as elementary school. Michael would attend an elite private school and have access to specialized labs and instructors." "Would we have to move to New York City?" asked Helen, who had come to listen. "Not necessarily. The program includes boarding school housing with regular visits home." The possibility of being separated from his family was frightening for everyone, especially Michael. "Dr. Lewis," Michael said timidly, "would I have to live far from my family?" "During the week, yes, Michael. But you could come home, on weekends and holidays." "And leave the shop?" "Well, you'd have little time for the shop. The program is quite intense." The proposal, though generous, presented a fundamental dilemma for the Johnson family. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but would require significant sacrifices. "Dr. Lewis," said Stephen, "when do we need to decide?" "They want an answer in 2 weeks. It's for the program to start next semester. And do you think we should accept?" "That's a decision only you can make. But I can say it's the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime." After Dr. Louis left, the Johnson family was torn between excitement and apprehension. It was clearly an extraordinary opportunity, but the emotional cost would be high. "Carl," said Helen that night, "what do you think we should do?" "I don't know, Helen. On one hand, it's an amazing chance for Michael. On the other, he's still a child and needs his family. And you, Michael? Helen asked. What do you want? I don't know, Mom. I want to study and learn, but I don't want to be away from you all in the shop. Son, maybe there's a middle ground. How so? Maybe we can negotiate with the company so you can participate in the program without living in New York City. Carl's idea was interesting, keeping Michael at home while allowing him to take part in specific parts of the educational program. The next day, Carl called Dr. Lewis to discuss possible adjustments. After several conversations with the engineering firm, they reached an alternative agreement. Michael would join a modified program, Summer Intensives in New York City, Special. Projects during the year, and remote mentorship with experienced engineers. It would be an exceptional supplemental education without requiring separation from his family. What do you think of this option? Dr. Lewis asked when presenting the negotiated alternative. It sounds perfect, Helen replied immediately. Michael would get the best of both worlds, Carl agreed. And you, Michael? Stephen asked. What do you think? I think it's great, Uncle. I can learn new things but still help here at the shop. The decision to accept the modified program was unanimous. Michael would have access to elite education without sacrificing his family life or his passion for the shop. 3 months after accepting the special program, Michael attended his first summer intensive in New York City. For 2 weeks, he studied alongside talented young people from across the country, absorbing advanced knowledge in math, physics, and engineering. When he returned home, he was more excited than ever, both about his academic prospects and their practical applications at the shop. How was it, son? Carl asked eagerly. It was incredible, Dad. I learned things that'll help a lot here at the shop. Like what? Vibration analysis, advanced thermodynamics, material behavior under stress. Things that explain problems we sometimes see here. The supplemental education clearly benefited both Michael and the shop. He returned from each program with new knowledge that translated into better diagnostics and solutions. A year after accepting the special program, Johnson & Sons had become a regional reference for difficult cases. Michael, now 12, had found the perfect balance between advanced formal education and the practical application of his talents. However, an unexpected situation was about to put all these achievements at risk. Roger Sanders, the owner of a competing shop, had spent the last year losing customers to the Johnson brothers and was desperate to turn things around. One Friday afternoon, Roger showed up at the shop with a proposal that surprised everyone. Stephen, said Roger with an uncharacteristically humble expression, I need to talk to you about a business proposal. What kind of proposal, Roger? I want to form a partnership between our shops. The suggestion was so unexpected that Stephen was speechless for a few seconds. Partnership? Stephen repeated, incredulous. That's right. Combine our operations, pool our resources, expand our market reach. Roger, you spent the last year trying to hurt our business. Why this sudden change? Because I realized I was acting the wrong way. You have something special here, and it would be better for us to work together rather than against each other. Carl and Jack approached the conversation, equally surprised by Roger's proposal. And what exactly would this partnership look like? Asked Carl. I'd contribute my larger facility and more advanced equipment. You'd contribute, well, with Michael's talent. Roger's true motivation finally came to light. He didn't want a partnership, he wanted access to Michael's talent to save his own business. Roger, Stephen said firmly, my nephew isn't a product to be shared. I'm not talking about sharing, I'm talking about giving him access to better resources. What resources? Electronic diagnostic equipment, specialized tools, bigger facilities, things that could further enhance his talent. The proposal had some technical merits, but Roger's motivation was clearly self-serving. I can discuss this with my family, Stephen said diplomatically. Of course, but don't take too long to decide. It's a limited-time opportunity. After Roger left, the Johnson family gathered to discuss the unexpected proposal. What do you all think? Stephen asked. I think it's a trap, Carl replied immediately. How so? Roger spent a year trying to undermine us. Now that we're thriving, he wants to benefit from our success. But he's right about having better equipment, Jack pointed out. Equipment doesn't make diagnoses, Jack. People do. Michael listened to the discussion in silence, processing the implications of Roger's proposal. "Can I give my opinion?" Michael asked. "Of course, son," Carl replied. "I don't think we need Mr. Roger. We're doing fine on our own and he just wants to take advantage of our work." "But what if he can really offer better resources?" Stephen asked. "Uncle, what makes our work special isn't the equipment. It's how we work together and genuinely care about our customers." Michael's wisdom impressed all the adults present. At 12 years old, he already understood that real success comes from values, not just material resources. "Michael's right," Helen agreed. "Our strength is being a family working together." "So are we all in agreement to refuse the offer?" Stephen asked. "I think so," Carl replied. "But let's think about it for a few more days before giving a final answer." The following Monday, Stephen informed Roger that the family had decided to decline the partnership proposal. Roger wasn't surprised, but he wasn't pleased either. "Stephen, you're making a mistake," Roger said. "On your own, you have limitations that will hinder future growth." "Maybe, Roger, but we'd rather grow at our own pace and keep our values. Your values won't pay the bills when the competition gets tougher. Let us worry about our own bills." The refusal of the partnership marked the end of Roger's attempts to benefit from the success of Johnson & Sons. He finally accepted that he'd have to find other ways to compete in the market. 6 months after the episode with Roger, the shop continued to thrive. Michael was excelling both academically and professionally, and the Johnson family's reputation was solid in the region. However, a new challenge was emerging. The very success of their shop was creating more demand than they could handle. Customers sometimes had to wait weeks just to have their problems diagnosed by Michael. "Stephen," Carl said one particularly busy afternoon, "we need to talk about expanding our operation." "What do you mean?" "We're losing customers because we can't keep up with the demand. But expanding means hiring more mechanics, and we can't train others to do what Michael does. Maybe we don't need to train others to do exactly what Michael does. Maybe we can organize our work better." Carl's suggestion led to a reorganization of the shop. They created a system where Michael focused exclusively on difficult diagnostics, while Stephen, Carl, and Jack handled more routine issues. This specialization allowed them to serve more customers without compromising the quality of their work. Michael could dedicate more time to each complex case, while the adults efficiently resolved simpler problems. The reorganization was a success. Within a few months, the shop was running more efficiently and satisfying all their customers better. 2 years after Michael officially began working at the shop, when he was 13, the Johnson family received unexpected recognition. The Regional Automotive Mechanics Association wanted to award the shop a special prize for excellence in diagnostics. "Stephen," the association's president said during a visit, "you've built an exceptional reputation in the region. We'd like to recognize that officially." "Thank you very much," Stephen replied, clearly moved. "The award will be presented at our annual convention. We hope the whole family can attend." "Of course we'll be there. And we'd like Michael to give a presentation on diagnostic methodology." The idea of speaking to an audience of professional mechanics was intimidating, but Michael accepted the challenge. "Dad," Michael said that night, "do you think I can really speak to experienced mechanics?" "I'm sure you can, son. You have knowledge and experience that many of them admire, but they know so much more than I do. Maybe they know different things, but you have a unique perspective they don't." The mechanics convention was held in the state capital, and the Johnson family attended in full force. When it was time for Michael's presentation, the auditorium was packed with over 200 professionals. "Gentlemen," Michael began nervously, "my name is Michael Johnson, and I'd like to share some thoughts on automotive diagnostics." For the next 30 minutes, Michael explained his approach to diagnostics, careful observation, logical analysis of symptoms, and the importance of asking customers the right questions. The audience listened in respectful silence, occasionally interrupting with technical questions that Michael answered with competence and confidence. "To conclude," Michael said at the end of his presentation, I'd like to say that diagnostics isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and carefully observing the clues the cars give us. The audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. Experienced mechanics stood to congratulate Michael on the clarity and depth of his presentation. "Young man," said a veteran mechanic, "in 40 years in this profession, I've never heard anyone explain diagnostics so clearly and logically." "Thank you, sir. I learned by watching other mechanics and trying to understand the patterns behind the problems." Michael's presentation at the convention solidified his reputation not just regionally, but throughout the state. Workshops from other cities began sending difficult cases to Johnson & Sons. However, the growing success was creating new pressures in Michael's life. He was constantly being called for consultations, presentations, and even job offers from other companies. "Son," Carl said one evening, "how are you feeling with all this attention?" "Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming, Dad. I'd rather work quietly in the shop than keep doing presentations." "Do you want to cut back on these outside activities?" "I think so. I want to focus more on my studies and work at the shop." Michael's decision to prioritize substance over publicity showed his growing maturity. He was learning to tell the difference between genuine opportunities and unnecessary distractions. In the following months, the Johnson family became more selective about outside invitations. They only accepted those that offered real educational value or chances to help people truly in need. By the time Michael turned 14, Johnson & Sons was established as the state's go-to for complex automotive diagnostics. Michael continued attending advanced educational programs, always expanding his theoretical knowledge. But an unexpected situation was about to test everything the family had built. Professor Marcus from the university arrived at the shop on a Tuesday with a proposal that would change everything. "Michael," Professor Marcus said, "I have an exceptional opportunity for you." "What kind of opportunity, Professor?" "An American university is offering a full scholarship to exceptionally talented young people. You could start college at 15. The proposal was even more dramatic than the previous ones. Studying in the United States at 15 would mean extraordinary opportunities, but also immense sacrifices. "Professor," Carl said cautiously, "does this mean Michael would have to move to the US?" "Yes, but it would be a world-class education, cutting-edge labs, renowned professors, unlimited resources." "And for how long?" "The full program would be 4 years for the bachelor's degree, then master's and PhD if he wanted." The magnitude of the opportunity was impressive, but also frightening. It would mean years apart from his family, not just weekends. "Professor," Michael said after a few moments of silence, "can I have a few days to think about it?" "Of course, Michael, but the answer must be given within 2 weeks. After Professor Marcus left, the Johnson family was torn between conflicting feelings. It was clearly the opportunity of a lifetime, but the emotional cost would be very high. "What do you all think?" Michael asked that night. "Son," Helen said, "this is a decision only you can make. Whatever you choose, we'll support you." "But I want to know your opinions." "Academically, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," Carl said. "Emotionally, it would be very hard for all of us." "And professionally?" Michael asked. "You'd have access to knowledge and resources that could make you one of the best engineers in the world," Stephen replied. "But I'd lose years of hands-on. Work at the shop." "True. And hands-on experience isn't something you learn from books." Michael spent the next days in deep reflection. He visited Dr. Louis for advice, talked to Professor Anthony about educational prospects, and even called some of their closest clients to hear their opinions. After a week of consideration, Michael made a decision that surprised even himself. "Family," Michael said on a Saturday morning, "I've made my decision about the American university." "And what is it?" Helen asked anxiously. "I'm going to turn it down." "Are you sure, son?" Carl asked. "I'm sure. I realized my passion isn't just for theoretical engineering. It's for solving real problems for real people. And you can do that with advanced education," Stephen remarked. "I can, but I don't need to go to the United States for that. I can keep studying here, participating in special programs, and applying knowledge in the shop." "Aren't you limiting your opportunities?" Helen asked. "No, Mom. I'm choosing the kind of opportunity that truly fulfills me. Michael's decision to prioritize practical application over academic prestige showed exceptional maturity for his age. He had learned to distinguish between what others thought he should do and what he truly wanted to do. "Son," Carl said proudly, "you've made a very mature decision." "Thank you, Dad. I know many people won't understand, but I feel it's the right choice for me." "And we fully support your decision," Stephen added. When Professor Marcus returned to hear the answer, he was surprised but not disappointed by Michael's choice. "Michael," Professor Marcus said, "may I say you've made a very thoughtful decision?" "I hope so, Professor." "You understand. You're choosing a less conventional path?" "I do, but I also understand conventional paths don't always lead to happiness." "Very wise, and I can assure you the university's doors will always be open if you change your mind someday." "Thank you, Professor. That means a lot to me." The decision to decline the American opportunity marked a definitive point of maturity for Michael. He had chosen his own definition of success rather than accepting definitions imposed by others. Over the next 2 years, Michael continued developing his talents through the perfect blend of advanced education and practical application. By 16, he was recognized as one of the country's top automotive diagnosticians, but more importantly, he was genuinely happy with his choices. Johnson & Sons had become a thriving, respected business while maintaining the family values that made it special. Michael was preparing to gradually take on more responsibilities, planning to expand services to include technical consulting and training for other mechanics. One evening, after a particularly productive day, Michael was organizing tools when a special customer arrived at the shop. Mrs. Carmen, the woman who'd been one of his first success stories years earlier. "Good evening, Michael," Mrs. Carmen greeted, stepping out of a new car. "Good evening, Mrs. Carmen. What a lovely surprise. How are you?" "Wonderful, dear. I came to show you my new car and mainly to thank you all." "Thank us for what, Mrs. Carmen?" "For always treating me kindly and fixing my problems quickly. You've made my life so much easier all these years." "That makes me very happy to hear, Mrs. Carmen." "Michael, may I tell you something?" "Of course. When I first met you, you were just a boy who loved cars. Now you're a young man who's changed many lives." "Mrs. Carmen, let me finish. You taught me age doesn't matter when someone has talent and a good heart. That changed how I see many things in life." Mrs. Carmen's words touched Michael deeply. He realized his work had impacted people in ways far beyond just fixing cars. "Thank you, Mrs. Carmen. Knowing I could help in some way makes me very happy." "Keep going, Michael. The world needs more people like you." After Mrs. Carmen left, Michael reflected on the journey he'd taken since that first day diagnosing the Mustang's problem. He'd faced challenges, overcome prejudices, and found his place in the world. That evening during dinner, Michael shared his thoughts with the family. "Family," Michael said, "I want to thank you all for always supporting me." "No need to thank us, son," Helen replied. "We just did what any family would do." "No, you didn't just do what any family would do. You believed in me when others doubted me. You gave me opportunities when others put up obstacles. You stood by me when I had to make tough choices." "And we're proud of every choice you've made," Carl said emotionally. "Michael," Stephen added, "you didn't just fulfill your own potential. You taught us that talent can appear in the most unexpected ways." "And now," Helen asked, "what are your plans for the future?" "I want to keep studying, keep learning, and keep helping people through the shop. But most of all, I want to keep doing it with all of you." "That's the best answer we could have hoped for," Stephen said with a smile. 3 years later, when Michael turned 19, Johnson & Sons had become a nationally recognized automotive technical consulting firm. Michael had simultaneously earned a degree in mechanical engineering through a special program that combined theoretical studies with practical application. He still lived in his hometown, still worked at the family shop, but now also offered consulting for manufacturers, training for mechanics, and developed new diagnostic techniques. The boy who had been mocked for trying to help had become a young man respected for his skill, integrity, and above all, for never forgetting his roots. On the morning of his 19th birthday, Michael arrived at the shop, and found a surprise waiting for him. All the customers he had helped over the years had gathered for a surprise party. "Surprise!" they all shouted as he walked in. Michael was moved to see familiar faces: Dr. Paul with his Beetle, Mrs. Teresa with her Fiesta, Albert with his Mercedes, Mrs. Carmen, Professor Anthony, Dr. Louis, and dozens of other customers who had become friends over the years. "Everyone," Michael said emotionally. "You didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Dr. Paul interrupted. "You deserve every bit of this." "Michael," Mrs. Teresa said, "you've transformed our town. You've shown that talent and kindness can overcome any obstacle. And you've inspired so many children to believe in their own gifts," Professor Anthony added. The party lasted all morning, with customers sharing stories about how Michael had helped them not just with car troubles, but also with life lessons about perseverance, humility, and skill. At the end of the celebration, when everyone had left, the Johnson family gathered in the shop for a quiet moment. "Michael," Stephen said, "when you were little and insisted on looking at engines, I thought it was just a child's curiosity." "And it was curiosity, Uncle. It just grew into something bigger. You proved that when talent meets opportunity and support, incredible things can happen. We all proved that, Uncle. It was a family effort." Carl wrapped an arm around his son. "I'm curious to see what the next few years will bring." "Me too, Dad. But I know whatever it is, we'll face it together." "Like we always have," Helen agreed. "And like we always will," Stephen added. Michael looked around the shop where it had all begun. The same tools, the same workbenches, the same place that had sparked his passion years ago. But now it was also where he had built a career, formed friendships, and learned priceless lessons about life. "Family," Michael finally said. "Thank you for teaching me that success isn't about being recognized by others. It's about using your talents to make the world a little better." "That's the most important lesson of all," replied Carl. "And one you've learned very well," Stephen added proudly. When the sun set on that special day, the Johnson family knew they had achieved something rare and valuable. They had found a way to combine personal fulfillment with family values, ambition with humility, success with integrity. The story of the young mechanic who was ridiculed but never gave up had become a local legend. But more importantly, it had become a source of inspiration for anyone who ever had a dream questioned or a talent underestimated. Years later, when young mechanics visited Johnson & Sons' shop to learn from Michael, he always told the same story. Talent without hard work is just wasted potential. Hard work without passion is just obligation. But when you combine talent, hard work, and passion with the support of people who believe in you, there's no limit to what you can achieve. And every time he told that story, Michael looked around, the shop where it all began, at the family who always stood by him, and felt a deep gratitude for having the courage to hold on to his dreams even when others laughed. Johnson & Sons continued to thrive, not just as a business, but as a symbol that with determination, family support, and a little courage to face skepticism, anyone can turn their passion into achievement. And Michael, now a respected young engineer who never forgot his roots, still woke up every day eager to get to the shop, always looking for the next problem to solve, the next customer to help, the next opportunity to prove that when you do what you love with skill and integrity, success is just a natural result. The young mechanic had grown up, but the passion that drove him remained the same, turning knowledge into help, talent into service, and dreams into reality. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of Michael's story and his journey in the E-Sayyib shop. Do you believe talent should be nurtured regardless of age? Share your thoughts on perseverance and family support in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us on this long journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories.